The wind howled across the icy wastes, rattling the timbers of the hastily reinforced wall. Beneath the frosty moonlight, torches burned like flickering sentinels on the battlements, their flames guttering in the freezing gusts that smelled of death and ruin. Night enveloped the world in an eerie hush, punctured only by the distant clamor of steel on ice and the moaning of the wind as it slid through the ice-encrusted stones. Far below, the tundra stretched in an endless expanse of desolation. The White Walkers were on the march, their undead legions surging in a dreadful tide, while the living scrambled to mount a last, desperate defense. But tonight, that defense stood with a new, unearthly power by its side. Drogon perched atop the wall, his vast black wings folded close to his sides, head raised to the star-flecked sky. His enormous bulk carved a silhouette of coiled musculature against the moonlit horizon. The torches cast dancing shadows over his obsidian scales. Within his crimson eyes burned an ancient intelligence and, perhaps for the first time, the shimmer of otherworldly purpose. Men looked up at him in awe, hearts pounding with reverence and no small amount of fear, for the dragon was more than he had been. Word had spread like wildfire that R'hllor, the Lord of Light, had answered desperate prayers uttered in the darkest nights, and in doing so had placed a singular blessing upon the mightiest of Daenerys Targaryen's children. It had happened only days before, when the war seemed near its blackest hour. The living forces had converged at Winterfell to prepare for the unstoppable march of the dead. Daenerys, flanked by Ser Jorah Mormont and Grey Worm, had tried to steel her troops for the horrors that awaited them. The nights were colder than any had ever known, and the gloom carried with it the knowledge that Viserion, once the beloved child of Daenerys, now flew under the command of the Night King, spouting an icy breath that could shatter ramparts and freeze men solid where they stood. The heartbreak for Daenerys was immense, and her pain radiated out from her every gesture. Melisandre had returned, speaking cryptically of the Lord of Light's gift, her voice trembling with a conviction that commanded belief. She had looked upon Drogon with a gaze of piercing comprehension, as though seeing something beyond mortal eyes. Daenerys, grief and hope warring in her heart, had given the Red Priestess leave to attempt whatever ritual she deemed possible. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, king in the north and Daenerys' steadfast ally, had watched warily, but did not intervene, for he understood that only the greatest wonders might save them now. So, under a crimson moon, surrounded by torches and bowls of pungent oils, Melisandre had called upon R'hllor to bless this dragon. She had chanted in a dialect older than the hills, older than the first men, her voice echoing off the silent sky until she collapsed in exhaustion. And then Drogon roared, spewing flames so bright it temporarily rivaled the sun, setting even stone ablaze and scorching the ground into black glass. The watchers had trembled in terror and wonder. When Drogon's roar subsided, he dropped his head almost in supplication. Steam rose from his flanks and the obsidian quality of his scales gleamed with a subtle aura. His eyes glowed, two red coals beneath monstrous ridges of black, and Daenerys felt a pulse at the core of her being. It was as if the bond between them had deepened, forging something even more profound than before. She ran to him, fearless, pressing her palm to his warm flank, and she swore she could feel the heartbeat of fire itself, stoked by R'hllor's luminous favor. In the days that followed, men whispered that Drogon had become the anointed dragon. Whispers carried from mouth to mouth of how ice and cold no longer seemed to bother him. He would walk upon the frost-laced fields with steam rising from his powerful limbs as though the snow melted beneath his clawed feet. Unarmed men would approach him, still fearful, still respectful, and see the faint glow trailing across his scales, a shimmer of heat that never seemed to die. They said he was proof that the Lord of Light had not abandoned them to darkness. Even the priests of the north, skeptical of southern gods and their ways, did not refute these rumors outright. They had seen him burn whites to cinders with the merest exhalation of flame and return unscathed from their slashing ice blades. Nor had the White Walkers dared to pit their powers against him directly yet. Perhaps they sensed something new, something unassailable. All of this led to the Great Muster at the Wall, a final attempt to hold back the Night King's forces. Daenerys had insisted on flying north to help defend that last massive barrier, though many had counseled retreat or other tactics. But Daenerys, in league with Jon, believed that if the Night King broke through the wall, the entire realm would be doomed. With the minimal forces they could scrape together after the harrowing battles near Winterfell, they headed for the wall. Drogon, newly empowered, soared ahead, carving through the northern sky with unrelenting speed. Night fell as they arrived. The undead swarmed, blackening the horizon. Amid the blizzard-laden clouds, an unearthly shriek tore the heavens. Viserion, or what remained of him, a rotted vision of the once golden dragon, spilled forth a blast of deadly blue frost, striking the Watch's outer fortifications. Men screamed as the ice engulfed them. Some were instantly turned into statues of rime, shattered with ease by the wights clambering over the breach. Jon mustered the survivors, archers and swordsmen lined up atop the ramparts, loosing arrows into the icy gloom, while trebuchets hurled boulders and flaming tar. From her vantage point, Daenerys turned her gaze skyward as she saw a pale silhouette sliding through the swirling clouds, the tatters of wings cutting an awful shape. Every chord of her heart ached at the sight. Once, she had loved Viserion as her child, her pride. Now, a monstrous version of him served death incarnate. Her voice caught in her throat. She felt Drogon tense beneath her, the spines along his neck bristling with rage, and she stroked him gently as if to calm him. Even from the ground, men saw that moment. The living dragon, black as a starless midnight, poised upon the ice-bombarded wall, confronting the wraith-like figure circling overhead. The air seemed to hold its breath. Daenerys felt the presence of the Night King, an oppressive wave of inhuman will. But through Drogon's newly kindled bond, she felt a stronger force at her side. She whispered a fervent prayer to R'hllor, or maybe simply to hope itself, then urged Drogon aloft. His roar split the frigid air, an eruption of primal fury. With one tremendous beat of his wings, he leapt from the wall, smashing ice and stone from the parapets as he took flight. Daenerys clung to his ridged back, the cold wind slicing across her cheeks as she rose into the tumultuous sky. Below her, the battle between the living and the dead raged in a cacophony of screams and clashing steel. Arrows hissed, swords rang out, and the moans of the undead merged into a relentless din. But up here, above the swirling snow, it was another war entirely. Dragon against dragon, fire against ice, mother against the child twisted to unholy ends. Viserion's white-blue eyes glowed with a malevolent light as he spied Drogon. The undead dragon banked, and Daenerys could see the gashes in its once beautiful hide, the places where flesh had rotted away to reveal bleached bone. She nearly sobbed at the tragedy of it, at the twisted form of what had been so innocent. Then came the wave of cold, a swirling, creeping aura that chilled even the night sky. Viserion unleashed a roar that carried with it a torrent of blistering cold, a lance of white-blue frost that crackled through the air. It streaked straight at Drogon. Daenerys braced for the impact, braced for the unthinkable possibility that she might lose Drogon the same way she lost Viserion. But Drogon only roared, and the temperature around him seemed to spike. A shimmering heat radiated off his scales, forming an intangible shield of haze and flame. The deadly frost blast collided with this barrier and faltered, scattering into harmless shards of snow and ice that fell to the ground below. Daenerys let out an elated gasp. She felt the intensity of Drogon's power resonate through her entire body. He was truly immune to the freezing curses of the Night King. R'hllor's enchantment had worked beyond her wildest hopes. Viserion banked away, a rasping cry vibrating through the air. Perhaps it was the Night King guiding him, or perhaps some sliver of draconic instinct recognized the threat. Drogon gave chase, streaking through the clouds with savage grace. Steam poured off his jaws, and Daenerys gave the command in a single breath, Dracarys. The flames that erupted from his maw were tinged a deep crimson, seeming hotter and more intense than mere dragon fire. The inferno lit the sky like a second sunrise, bathing both dragons in a haze of fiery light. Viserion tried to evade, twisting his serpentine form with unnatural agility. But even the white dragon could not fully escape the torrent that grazed the edge of his right wing, setting rotted flesh ablaze in an instant. The shriek that tore from Viserion's throat shook the sky. Below, the clamor of battle paused for one breath, men on both sides glancing up to witness the colossal duel. Flames danced across Viserion's decayed membrane, and though the dragon remained aloft, it was clear that Drogon's fire had made its mark. Baring his fangs with savage hunger, Drogon angled upward and then folded his wings, diving with lethal speed at the wounded undead dragon. The two collided in midair, a fury of teeth and claws. Daenerys, strapped in as firmly as she could be, held on with both arms, face pressed against Drogon's scales as she felt the concussive blow of their bodies colliding. She glanced at the swirling mass of wings and snapping jaws. Every snap of Drogon's jaws carried that aura of flame, while every bite Viserion attempted seemed to coat Drogon in frost. Yet the frost evaporated in seconds, steam hissing off Drogon's impervious hide. High above the battlefield, the two dragons tore at one another, locked in mortal combat. Below, the undead horde fought with renewed fervor. The Night King prowled the outskirts of the conflict on his dead horse, eyes fixed on the sky. Jon Snow, sword flashing in the torchlight, bellowed for archers to target the White Walkers controlling pockets of whites, while Tormund Giantsbane roared encouragement to the remaining free folk as they hacked their way through the relentless swarm. The shadow of the aerial battle flickered across the field as lightning flickers across a storm-lashed coast. A wave of whites crashed against the bottom of the wall. The defenders poured boiling oil and flaming arrows onto the mass, but the undead did not slow. Even after their bodies caught fire, they mindlessly continued to climb, scrabbling for any handhold. The White Walkers, ancient lords of the night, raised spears of ice and hurled them with supernatural strength, toppling defenders with chilling accuracy. Corpses littered the stones only to rise again at the Night King's silent command. It was a vision of nightmares given form. On a rocky outcrop near the top of the wall's stairs stood Jon Snow, longclaw in hand, cloak flapping around him in the biting wind. His breath fogged the air. He scanned the tumult with grim determination. Through the swirling snow, he could see Daenerys and Drogon above, locked in a dance of death with Viserion, trailing arcs of frost and fire across the sky. For a moment, his heart seized with fear for Daenerys, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had to trust her. Their cause could not fail, it was too important. Another wave of whites threatened to overwhelm the battered gate to his left. With a wordless cry, Jon sprinted down the stairs, rallying those who remained to push back the dead. Steel met bone, flesh parted. He was relentless, a figure of unyielding resolve, forging a path of hope in the midst of despair. Above, Drogon's ferocious claws raked at Viserion's neck, tearing free chunks of decaying hide. Blue ichor, something beyond normal blood, spattered across the sky. Daenerys could not look away, her eyes brimming with both sorrow and wrath. She wanted to end Viserion's suffering, to release him from the clutches of the Night King. Yet the sight of Viserion's ravaged body, a mockery of the proud creature he had once been, threatened to break her composure. She tightened her grip on Drogon's reins, guiding him to press the attack. She felt the heat radiating off his scales, and she knew that as long as Rhaenyra's blessing coursed through him, the Night King's power over ice would not claim him. Down below, the Night King slowly lifted his pale hand as if testing the air. The presence of the enchanted dragon had changed the tide of the battle. Even from a distance, it was clear he sensed something interfering with his control, some power that defied his bleak domain. His eyes blazed an even fiercer shade of blue. He lifted his spear, a slender, elegant weapon carved from the purest ice, and took aim at the swirling forms in the sky. An aura of deathly cold gathered around him, funneling up his arm. In the thick of the melee, men too slow to get out of the way simply froze in place, thin layers of ice creeping over their flesh. The White Walkers around him looked on with reverent silence. In a sharp throw that whistled through the air, the Night King hurled his spear. It streaked upward, leaving a trail of freezing mist in its wake. Daenerys saw the movement out of the corner of her eye, a glint of deadly blue, and she shouted a warning to Drogon. The dragon snarled, tilting his vast wings to dodge aside. The spear narrowly missed them, flying past in a crackling haze before plunging down and impaling itself into the thick ice at the base of the wall, shattering stone and sending a flurry of debris skyward. Anger flared in Daenerys. She recalled how easily one of those very spears had ended Viserion's life not long ago. With a furious cry, she urged Drogon to wheel around in the air. The black dragon roared, surging forward with newfound vigor. She spotted the Night King below, astride his undead steed, another spear already forming in his hand. Daenerys commanded Drogon to unleash his fire. Drogon inhaled, chest expanding, and spat forth a raging inferno that poured from the sky in a shining pillar of flame. It descended on the Night King like a blazing comet. Flame consumed the ground, scorching whites to ash and melting the surface of the ice. The blaze raged with such intensity that those watching from afar shielded their eyes. For an instant, it seemed as if the very ground itself would melt. Then, in the heart of the inferno, the Night King stood, untouched, an aura of frigid cold beating back the fire at the last second. A hiss of steam and swirling sparks erupted around him as the flames died, quenched by that dark, unearthly chill. Men gasped in horror. The White Walkers watched in eerie composure. Daenerys felt her stomach twist. He was more powerful than she'd imagined. Lawler's blessing protected Drogon from the Night King's frost, but it did not guarantee an easy victory against the Master of Winter himself. Yet even the Night King could not mask the anger that flickered across his pale visage. He threw his second spear, again aiming at Drogon with preternatural accuracy. But the same shimmering heat that protected Drogon from cold seemed now to distort the air around him, as if bending the spear's path away. The frost-tipped weapon missed its mark a second time, lodging harmlessly in an avalanche of ice near the eastern slope of the wall. A hush gripped the battlefield. Lawler's blessing was thwarting the Night King's deadliest weapon. Within Daenerys's chest, a surge of hope flared. Meanwhile, the aerial struggle between Drogon and Viserion intensified. Even with the unstoppable cold that iced his breath, Viserion could not wound Drogon, whose scales glowed with that faint, divine radiance. In turn, Drogon tore into the undead dragon relentlessly, flames licking across that putrid hide. Bits of leathery membrane rained down on the battlefield. The Night King spurred his horse forward, attempting to reposition for another throw, but the clash of men and wights impeded him. Jon Snow led a charge, joined by Grey Worm and a contingent of Unsullied, cutting down waves of skeletal wights until their path crossed dangerously close to the Night King himself. With a slight shift of his head, the Night King commanded more White Walkers to join, their ice blades singing as they entered the fray against the living. The snow pelted the warriors, swirling like stinging needles. Among the flurries, ghosts of the past seemed to watch, the eyes of the ancient dead burying the land in silent condemnation. And still, the battle raged. Tormund rallied the free folk to protect the flanks, while Gendry hammered away at wights with a fury that belied his lean frame, forging a path for archers to reposition. The living fought with the desperation of those who know there will be no second chance. If they failed here, the entire realm would drown beneath a tide of darkness. Far above, the roars of the battling dragons were a crescendo of cataclysmic thunder. Daenerys guided Drogon into a steep climb, the wind streaming across her face. She could see the brilliant swirl of the aurora borealis above, faint colors dancing in the sky, as if some cosmic force recognized the epic confrontation unfolding below. She could feel Drogon's heart pounding in sync with her own, their connection closer than ever before. The cold tried to gnaw at her cheeks, her fingers, but there was a pocket of radiant warmth she could tap into from Drogon. Whenever the frost threatened to claim her, she felt a gentle wave of heat pass along the saddle, as if Drogon protected her as well. Ahead, Viserion twisted around in the air, jaws parted in a hateful hiss. Blue flames coughed from his maw, jagged crystals of frozen breath. Drogon responded with a torrent of red gold fire. The two blasts collided, swirling in a chaotic maelstrom of flame and frost that sent shockwaves through the sky. Daenerys gritted her teeth, holding fast as the turbulence threatened to knock her from Drogon's back. She glanced down at the battlefield, seeing men thrown to their knees by the force of the clash. Even the White Walkers paused, their undead eyes tracking the storm overhead. When the blast subsided, both dragons reeled. Drogon's hide remained unblemished by the frost, while Viserion's rotting flesh burned brighter at the edges, corroded by the intense flame. Daenerys exhaled raggedly, thinking of how this battle might finally end. She couldn't let it go on forever. The living would be worn down by the ceaseless waves of the dead. Drogon had the advantage of Lawler's blessing, but the longer the fight dragged on, the more chance the Night King would find some dark sorcery to turn the tide. The only hope was to destroy Viserion and sever the Night King's link to him once and for all. Tears stung Daenerys's eyes. She had lost Viserion once, and now she had to do the unthinkable. Kill his shell. Yet it was not truly him. She told herself that over and over. Viserion was gone, free in whatever afterlife awaited dragons. What remained was a puppet of the Night King. She tightened her grip on Drogon, steeling herself. "End this," she whispered. Drogon roared in answer. He angled his wings to spiral around Viserion, searching for an opening. Daenerys braced, scanning the undead dragon's movements. She knew how they flew, how they fought. After all, she had raised them from hatchlings. She saw the stiff, unnatural way Viserion now banked, the hitch in his wings caused by the rotting flesh. She used that knowledge, guiding Drogon to maneuver behind Viserion's wounded flank. The monstrous undead dragon snarled, attempting to twist free, but Drogon was too fast. He seized that moment, clamping his jaws onto Viserion's exposed back, hooking his claws around the skeletal ribcage. Daenerys could hear bones snapping under Drogon's iron grip. Viserion unleashed an enraged howl, beating his wings to break free, but Drogon held firm. Daenerys could feel his body tense like a drawn bowstring. She steadied herself, rearing back, eyes locked on the undead dragon's neck where once Viserion had been strongest. Now, blackened tears in the flesh revealed shimmering traces of the Night King's magic, an eerie glow that flickered like cold fire. Drogon inhaled, chest heaving, and Daenerys uttered the one word that had changed everything. Dracarys. Flame erupted in a torrent from Drogon's jaws, scorching Viserion's neck and head. There was a blazing, terrible beauty to it, a final funeral pyre for the golden dragon that once was. The undead dragon bucked, shrieking in a sound that mixed fury, agony, and some faint echo of the past. The blue glow in Viserion's eyes began to flicker. The freezing aura lessened. Daenerys heard an unholy crack as bones shattered and great chunks of wing fell away in fiery ruin. The sky was filled with falling embers and swirling snow, a macabre dance of elements warring. Yet still, Viserion fought. With a last surge of the Night King's will, he twisted his head around, jaws parted. A wave of freezing breath struck Drogon directly in the side of the face. Daenerys cried out in horror. But Drogon did not recoil. That shimmering heat, the blessing of Lawlor, countered the frost. Where ice met his obsidian scales, steam rose in a furious hiss. The living dragon roared in defiance and poured more fire over Viserion's head. Below, the Night King watched with a chilling calm. He raised his hand as if to recall Viserion, but it was too late. The rotting flesh burned and the cracks in the undead dragon's skeleton grew wider. Then, in a final burst of flame, Viserion's skull splintered. Blue-white energy erupted outward, swirling like a dying star before vanishing into the night. The glow left Viserion's eyes. His body, half consumed by fire, began to plummet. Fragments of bone and charcoal-like scales rained down, scattering across the battlefield, smashing into the frozen ground with thunderous crashes. Drogon pulled back, releasing Viserion's remains. Daenerys watched with a tremor in her heart as what had once been her beloved dragon fell away beneath her. Tears streamed down her face, but a fierce determination held her upright. She had done what she must. Viserion's torment was at an end. Drogon let out a cry that echoed with a complex mixture of triumph and mourning. Then he banked sharply, turning his burning gaze on the White Walkers below. The effect on the battlefield was immediate. The Whites, once orchestrated in a near-perfect assault, faltered. Some collapsed outright in oat husks. Others, left without direct guidance, continued to flail and attack with mindless aggression, but the controlled coordination was gone. The living seized their chance. Under Jon's leadership, the northern defenders hacked through the line. The unsullied, disciplined, and unyielding pressed forward with their spears. Free folk charged, bellowing war cries, and knights from the Vale moved in tight formations, driving the Whites back, step by step. The Night King, still astride his pallid horse, surveyed the chaos. His face was a mask of ancient hatred, a statue carved from the oldest ice. In a measured motion, he turned his steed, as if contemplating retreat or regrouping. But Drogon descended, Daenerys guiding him like a black arrow from the heavens. She saw her enemy below, the one who had stolen Viserion, who threatened the entire realm with endless winter. She urged Drogon into a dive. The black dragon plummeted from the swirling clouds, flames dancing around his jaws. Arrows from the defenders soared harmlessly around them, overshadowed by the monstrous shape carving the sky. The Night King looked up, his expression unreadable. He lifted a hand, forming a fresh spear of razor-sharp ice. He prepared to throw it. Time seemed to slow. Daenerys held her breath, her heart thunderous in her ears. This was it, the final clash. She trusted Drogon's enchantment would hold. She trusted Lawlor's fire. She trusted her own will to protect what was left of her children, of her kingdom. The Night King hurled the spear with all his might. It shot upward, a streak of chilling light. For a fraction of a second, Daenerys thought she felt the cold near her face, creeping around the edges of the saddle. But Drogon's aura blazed to life. The air around him shimmered like a mirage. The spear struck that barrier of living flame, colliding in a burst of sizzling steam. An explosion of frost and sparks rained down, but it did not pierce Drogon. The shattered remnants of the spear spun off, slamming into a knot of whites to the side, turning them to powder. Drogon slammed into the Night King like a falling meteor. His massive talons carved into the frozen ground, sending shockwaves of ice shards in every direction. The undead horse disintegrated under the impact. The Night King was flung back, rolling through the snow in an unceremonious tumble. Daenerys leapt from Drogon's back, landing in a crouch, her fury white-hot. The Red Woman's prophecy stirred within her mind. She felt the warmth of the dragon swirl around her. The air was still alive with flame. The Night King rose slowly, ice crystals swirling in a vortex about him. His hand flexed. An icy sword manifested, delicate yet terrifying. Daenerys felt no fear. She remembered the countless nightmares of her childhood, the stories of the long night. She recalled all she had sacrificed, all she had lost. Her dragons, her people, even a part of her own innocence. She faced the Night King as the wind whipped at her silver-gold hair, swirling it around her like a halo of pale fire. Jon Snow appeared from behind a collapsed section of the wall, Longclaw slick with black blood. He limped slightly, his cloak torn, face streaked with grime and desperation. But his eyes ignited with hope when he saw the Night King, vulnerable on foot. The final confrontation, an end to this war. He stumbled across the battlefield toward Daenerys, hacking down a stray wight that lunged at him. Grey Worm and a handful of Unsullied rushed to flank him. The White Walkers in the vicinity had been scattered or destroyed, many undone by Viserion's final destruction. The Night King's gaze flicked from Daenerys to Jon. Then, with preternatural speed, he lunged at Daenerys, sword of ice whistling through the air. She sidestepped, defiance burning in her eyes. A small dagger of dragonglass glinted in her hand, the only weapon she carried besides Drogon's flames. She parried an impossibly swift blow that would have run her through, feeling the shock of cold vibrate up her arm. The moment of impact numbed her fingers. The Night King's strength was otherworldly, and she nearly lost her grip, but something, perhaps the remnants of R'hlloreth's blessing, helped her hold firm. Jon arrived at her side in a flurry of motion. Longclaw clashed with the Night King's blade. Sparks of frost flew. The Night King fought with inhuman grace, parrying both Daenerys and Jon with seeming ease, each movement a testament to centuries of silent warfare. Grey Worm thrust with a spear of dragonglass from behind, but the Night King pivoted, fracturing the spear with a backhanded swipe. Then Drogon roared, unleashing a plume of flame across the ground, cutting off the Night King's retreat and funneling him closer to Daenerys and Jon. Swords sang in the cold air. The Night King's chilling aura threatened to freeze the sweat on Daenerys's brow. She breathed out, summoning her courage, attacking from one side while Jon attacked from the other. Their blades glinted with the reflection of Drogon's fire. Steel rang on ice. The Night King lashed out, forcing Jon to duck beneath a lethal swing. But Daenerys saw her chance and slashed with her dragonglass dagger across the Night King's arm. She felt a sickening resistance, as if cutting through petrified wood. He hissed, the first vocal sound any had heard from him, and blackish frost bled from the wound. Daenerys pressed the attack, trying to dig the dagger deeper. But the Night King's free hand shot out, grasping her wrist in a vice-like grip. Pain lanced through her, the cold so intense that she thought her bones would shatter. Still, she glared into those blue eyes, refusing to back down, even as the breath caught in her throat. Then Jon struck from behind, hacking into the Night King's back with all his strength. A spidery network of cracks appeared across the ancient ice that served as the Night King's armor, and he released Daenerys with a snarl. Stumbling free, Daenerys gasped, clutching her wrist. Frost clung to her skin, but she was alive. The Night King reeled, black shards of his unnatural being flaking off. Still, he raised his sword for a final blow. Jon met him, their blades colliding in a thunderous clang that echoed across the battlefield. For a moment, they struggled, locked in a deadly contest of wills. Behind the Night King, Drogon coiled, his head rearing back, jaws aglow with the promise of incinerating flame. The Night King sensed it, twisting as if to fling his sword at the dragon. But that momentary shift gave Jon just enough time to slip inside his guard. With a resolute cry, Jon drove Longclaw into the Night King's chest. The Night King jerked, eyes widening in cold fury. Cracks spread from the wound, fracturing his pale flesh like a mirror under stress. Daenerys, seizing her final opportunity, lunged forward with the dragonglass dagger, thrusting it into the cracks. There was a thunderous sound like the splitting of a frozen lake in midwinter. The Night King stared at them both, a silent condemnation burning in his gaze. Then the cracks widened, racing outward. In a heartbeat, the Night King shattered into 1,000 shards of black ice that disintegrated into the swirling wind. Time seemed to hold its breath. All across the battlefield, whites slumped to the ground, collapsing in unison as though their puppet strings had been severed. White walkers, those that remained, exploded into shards of ice, their ephemeral forms scattered by the rising wind. An unearthly hush descended, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. Daenerys stood there, chest heaving, the dagger still clutched in her hand. Jon looked at her, his own breath steaming in the cold air, the shattered fragments of the Night King drifting around them like dark snowflakes. Gradually, cheering rose from the living. The men who had survived the onslaught realized what had happened, saw the wave of destruction passing through the undead army. Tormund let out a victorious roar. The Unsullied stood a bit taller, chests heaving with relief. Archers sank to their knees, shaking in exhaustion and awe. Ser Davos, battered and bloodied, wiped sweat from his brow and offered silent thanks. The war was not without cost. Countless had perished, and the wall was partially in ruins, but they had done the impossible. They had destroyed the Night King, the White Walkers, and the undead Viserion. Dawn seemed possible once more. Daenerys turned toward Drogon, who settled onto the blood-stained snow nearby. His sides heaved as he breathed, and steam rose from his scales. She approached him, numbness creeping into her limbs, and gently laid a hand on his flank. A trembling smile curved her lips. "You did it," she whispered, as if speaking to him alone. He rumbled, lowering his massive head, so he could press his snout softly against her side. She leaned into him, tears slipping down her cheeks, tears of both sorrow and joy. Jon limped forward, carrying Longclaw. His dark curls clung to his forehead, and bruises covered his arms. Yet his eyes shone with something like hope. He looked at Daenerys and Drogon, then around at the vast field of corpses, living and dead. Smoke from the scattered fires curled into the star-choked sky. The hush that had fallen now gave way to the muffled groans of injured men, the crackling of flames, and the weary shouts of those seeking survivors. No one who had fought there would ever be the same. Wordlessly, Jon extended a hand to Daenerys. She took it, feeling the warmth of his palm, and pulled herself upright. They regarded one another, both half in disbelief that they were alive, half in awe at what they had accomplished together. Jon broke the silence, his voice low and raw. "We've won," he said, though his tone carried a note of mourning for all they had lost. She nodded, her throat too tight for words. Her eyes lifted to Drogon, who once again spread his wings and bellowed into the night, a triumphant cry that rippled across the ruined battlefield. Even injured men found the strength to cheer in response, their roars mingling with Drogon's. Daenerys could sense the last echoes of the Lord of Light's enchantment flowing through Drogon's veins, shimmering across his scales like a final benediction. The darkness had been beaten back, if only for now, and Drogon, the unstoppable, enchanted dragon, stood at the heart of that victory. In the days that followed, the living gathered their wounded. They lit funeral pyres for their fallen, each flame a tribute to the cost of survival. Melisandre appeared once more, silent and spent, to stand vigil with Daenerys at the edge of the flames. The Red Priestess, her face streaked with ash, murmured prayers in that ancient language. Daenerys, too, prayed in her own way. She prayed for Viserion's soul, for Regal, for all the brave men and women who had given their lives. Jon Snow organized the survivors into groups to rebuild what they could of the wall and to tend the injured. Tormund and the free folk scoured the battlefield, ensuring no whites stirred in the corners. No White Walker shards remained to spawn some new threat. The nights were still cold, but the oppressive, suffocating evil that had haunted them was gone. A slow thaw seemed to grip the north. Perhaps it was the earliest sign that the long night was truly over. Drogon remained a constant presence, perched on the rugged slopes overlooking the encampment. Smoke rose from his nostrils as he slumbered. In flight, he patrolled the outskirts, ensuring no pockets of undead lurked in ambush. Men regarded him with a sense of reverence that bordered on worship. Word spread far beyond the north of the Black Dragon who had stood against the Night King and emerged unscathed, bathed in divine flames. Some called him Drogon the Blessed, others whispered that he was a living testament to the return of magic in the world. Daenerys did not know what to call him beyond my child, a child now touched by the power of a god. When at last the battered remnants of the realm's defenders made their way south, Drogon flew overhead. The night sky had lost much of its unnatural gloom, the air less bitter, the stars more vibrant. Ravens carried messages of the victory, telling all that the Night King was destroyed, his horde vanished. There was rejoicing in the Riverlands, celebrations in the Vale, and solemn relief in the Crownlands. Yet the cost had been immeasurable. Thousands lay dead, castles ruined, families shattered. Winter still lingered, but each dawn shone a little brighter. Hope kindled in hearts that had only known dread for too long. Daenerys, with Jon by her side, took solace in the knowledge that her child, though altered by a terrible war, had done what seemed impossible. She remembered the moment his flames annihilated Viserion, that heartbreak entwined with relief. Whenever she thought of it, she had to steady herself against an onrush of grief. But she remembered too that she had freed Viserion from a fate worse than death. In the darkest hour, Drogon had been her champion, forging a new legend for the realm. Where once songs were sung only of men and their battles, now minstrels spun tales of a black dragon infused with the Lord of Light's unyielding fire, a dragon that no frost could mar or blade of ice could pierce. They traveled to Winterfell to see to the wounded and rest. Snow draped the ancient fortress. Sansa Stark, reeling from the devastation of the war, greeted them in the courtyard, her breath catching at the sight of Drogon descending. He filled the sky, more massive than the last time she had seen him, his presence accompanied by gusting winds that rattled the very towers. Daenerys felt the tension in the onlookers, for the memory of a dragon's destructive might was fresh, but also glimpsed the hope in their eyes, the acceptance. Their queen and her unstoppable ally had saved them all. Within the great hall, a feast of sorts was prepared, somber but earnest. People ate and drank, toasting those who had fallen and celebrating the end of the undead threat. Daenerys sat at the high table with Jon, Sansa, Arya, and Bran. Ghost prowled the hall, still half-wild, his red eyes watchful. In quiet conversation, Daenerys learned of the tragedies that had befallen other houses during the final battles and offered what comfort she could. Outside, in the courtyard, Drogon's presence was like a protective shadow, his warmth permeating the walls. The normally freezing air around Winterfell's highest towers now carried a subtle heat where Drogon roosted, as though his very existence prevented the cold from gathering in full force. Late that night, when the revelers had quieted and the fires burned low, Daenerys slipped out into the courtyard. Snow lay thick, but Drogon had cleared a space for himself. The dragon's head rested on his foreclaws, his eyes half-lidded. Wisps of steam drifted around him. Daenerys felt the crunch of snow under her boots as she approached. She stood beside him, resting a hand on his flank. He shifted, opening his eyes fully, a low rumble reverberating in his throat. "I miss him," she murmured, voice trembling. It was unclear whether she spoke to Drogon, to the night, or to someone beyond. She let her tears fall freely, the same tears she had held back since the day Viserion fell. Drogon's gaze flickered with empathy and intelligence that spoke without words. She could almost feel his thoughts, hear his heartbeat. In that silent communion, she felt a wave of shared sorrow. Drogon, too, remembered his lost brother. "He's free now," a voice said from behind her, and Daenerys turned to see Jon standing there, face illuminated by the torchlight from the wall sconces. "Viserion can rest." She nodded, swallowing the ache in her throat. "I know. I wish I could have saved him." Jon stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Drogon watched them both but made no hostile move. "You did what you had to do," Jon said quietly. "You saved the realm. Without Drogon, we wouldn't be here." "Without you," he trailed off, the weight of his words clear. He had once told her, "We are going to destroy the Night King and his army," and now they had. But the losses cut deep. Daenerys turned to press her forehead against Drogon's scales. The dragon's warmth pulsed through her, dispelling the chill. She breathed in the smoky scent of his hide. "We'll rebuild," she said, her voice soft yet carrying a steely determination. "We'll make a new world, one without the threat of the dead. One where we can heal." Jon's hand lingered at her back. Yes, he agreed, though the path ahead was anything but certain. The realm was scarred, but it still stood. And that in itself was a victory. They had faced an ancient evil and won, though the cost in blood and tears was beyond measure. In the coming weeks, ravens flew all over Westeros, proclaiming that the Long Night's champion had been vanquished and that Daenerys Targaryen, aided by Jon Snow, had destroyed the Night King, aided by her dragon who was impervious to the freezing power of the enemy. War-weary lords and ladies found themselves forced to reckon with this new reality, a Targaryen queen seated in the north, bolstered by a dragon who had brushed aside the Night King's dread spears like they were nothing more than brittle twigs. Some declared fealty willingly, recognizing her part in averting a world-ending cataclysm. Others held reservations, whispering of the Targaryen madness that once ruined the continent. But no one dared deny the evidence of Drogon's unstoppable might. In the far corners of the land, scattered bands of wildlings told stories around their fires, weaving the tale of how the Black Dragon had breathed a holy flame that no cold could extinguish, how he had fought and slain his own undead brother in the northern sky. Over time, the stories morphed into legend that Drogon was part spirit of Valyria, part wrath of Lawlor, destined to bring warmth to a land threatened by eternal winter. Bards composed ballads of his battle at the Wall, exaggerating to the point where he was as large as a mountain with flames that could burn the sun. Children listened, eyes alight, dreaming of a hero that soared overhead on midnight wings. Still, to Daenerys, Drogon remained her beloved child, albeit a child touched by powers beyond her full understanding. She would visit him each day, often in the quiet hours before dawn, to run her hand along his flank and speak in murmurs, half lullabies from a childhood she barely recalled. Sometimes she felt that intangible presence, the faint echo of Lawlor's blessings still radiating from him, a subtle glow only visible in the corners of her vision. At such times, she wondered if she, too, was changed. Perhaps the Lord of Light had claimed some portion of her spirit the night Melisandre completed her ritual. She did not resent it if so. She had prayed to all gods who would listen, willing to do anything to save her people, to protect them from the darkness beyond the wall. If that meant carrying a piece of the Red God's flame within her, so be it. And so the realm slowly mended. Castles once battered by the war with the dead were rebuilt. Farmers returned to their fields, though many were lost. The harshness of winter receded more swiftly than expected, as if the removal of the Night King had lifted some cursed pall from the land. Spring buds began to appear on the blackened tree limbs near Winterfell's godwood, timid green shoots that signaled life's resilience. The north remained cold, but not hopelessly so. Snow still fell, but not as an endless blizzard. The living took advantage of every mild day, every break in the frosts, working to restore roads, villages, and keep the tenuous peace. For Daenerys and Jon, the next challenge loomed, the forging of a new order, a realm uniting north and south. But that was a fight of politics and diplomacy, not the raw survival that had consumed them for so long. Even so, Daenerys found moments to slip away from the endless negotiations and gatherings of lords to stand on the battlements, gazing at the horizon. She would see Drogon circling above, a sleek shadow against the clouds. Sometimes, the memory of that battle at the Wall weighed upon her, the screams of men and the roar of wights echoing in her mind. She found solace in the knowledge that the terror was over, that Drogon's impervious might had denied the Night King his greatest weapon, that the fires of Lawlor had burned away the chill that would have ended all things. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose, she saw Drogon glide down to the courtyard, sending stable boys scurrying in alarm. He settled with a thunderous thud, folding his wings. Daenerys made her way down. She stroked his vast neck, feeling the rhythmic rumble of his breathing. Then she climbed onto his back, letting out a quiet exhale. It had been some time since they flew together properly without the specter of war or dread behind them. She whispered an urging. Drogon crouched, tensing his powerful muscles, and then launched into the air. The ground fell away in an exhilarating rush. The sky welcomed them, the wind tangling in Daenerys's hair. For a moment, she simply closed her eyes and leaned into Drogon's warmth, letting the air currents cradle them both. All of Westeros unfurled beneath them like a patchwork. She spotted the outlines of fields, the faint glint of rivers. The sense of liberation was profound. They soared high, the last shards of sunlight catching on Drogon's black scales. She watched the land pass below, the rebuilt farms, the winding roads, small clusters of people gathered in the open, some even cheering as they saw the dragon overhead. It was a far cry from the early days of her conquest, when men cowered in fear. Now, they seemed to take heart at the sight of Drogon, for he symbolized not only her power but their salvation from the endless night that nearly claimed them. Drogon let out a gentle rumble, climbing to the top of a cloud bank. The air grew cooler, the wind sharper, but she felt only that comforting heat from him. Daenerys gazed out over the clouds, dyed pink and orange by the setting sun. Her heart swelled with an indescribable mixture of longing, gratitude, and love. In a way, she thought, this flight was both a farewell to the nightmares of the past and a promise of what was yet to come. She recalled the look in Viserion's eyes before he turned undead, the gentle memories of him swirling in the half-light of her mind. She mourned him still, but the sharp edge of her grief had dulled, replaced by a solemn acceptance. In that gentle hush above the clouds, Drogon angled his wings, coasting in a long, circular arc. Daenerys glimpsed the setting sun gilding the western horizon. She thought of what the future might hold, a realm no longer threatened by the dead, a chance to break the chains of old animosities, to unite houses under a banner of rebuilding. Drogon's presence, near invulnerable to the cold that once threatened them, was a testament to the fact that some bonds could never be broken, that some fires would never go out. When they finally returned to Winterfell's courtyard, dusk had fully settled and the torches cast dancing shadows. Jon stood waiting, a faint smile on his face, relief in his dark eyes. Daenerys dismounted, feeling the comforting ache in her muscles that came from riding so high. As she turned to Drogon to bid him good night, he bowed his colossal head, letting out a gentle huff of breath that ruffled her hair. She placed a tender kiss against his snout. Then he rose up, wings spreading, and soared to his perch near the castle's outer wall. Jon took Daenerys's hand. "You look lighter," he said softly, searching her face. She gave a small, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. "I suppose I am," she murmured, her voice touched by that same warmth that lingered after being so close to Drogon. "We're free of the long night, Jon. For once, we can look ahead." He squeezed her hand, guiding her back inside where the fires burned bright and the night air was kept at bay. Their steps echoed on the old stones. The burdens they carried were not gone, but they had shifted, transformed into something bearable, shaped by the knowledge that they had confronted the greatest evil and prevailed. The realm might yet slip into other conflicts, but never again would they face that same petrifying darkness, for the champion of the Night King lay in scattered ashes and the enchanted dragon of fire soared overhead as a vigilant sentinel. Legends would say that Drogon was never again harmed by any mortal weapon, so potent was the blessing placed upon him. Sellswords told tales of how he melted the swords of would-be assassins before they could ever raise a blade against him. Sailors along the coasts claimed to see him skimming the water, his breath turning the sea's surface into a thin mist that rolled away in shimmering waves. Children in the streets of King's Landing whispered that the Black Dragon was a sign of House Targaryen's divine right to rule, that he was a living flame of justice and retribution. In time, the lines between myth and memory blurred, as they often do. But Daenerys and all those who survived the war against the dead never forgot the truth. And the truth was this: Drogon, blessed by Lawler, had braved the icy horrors beyond the wall and destroyed his undead brother, Viserion, avenging that bitter betrayal. He had extinguished the Night King's greatest weapon and shattered the illusions of invincibility that cloaked the White Walkers. No matter how the songs changed or the stories embellished, that truth remained at the core. He was the Black Dragon, anointed by holy fire, a protector of life against death's creeping shadow. Through it all, Daenerys kept him close. Though the armies dispersed and lords returned to their keeps, Drogon's place was ever by his mother's side, a silent guardian who cast an impressive shadow across the land. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was high and the world seemed still, Daenerys would wander up the steps of Winterfell's battlements to find him perched in watchful repose, his red eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of new threats. She would lean against him, letting the slow thrum of his breathing lull her thoughts. Now and then she would feel a presence, a subtle warmth at her back, and imagine that somewhere Melisandre or another servant of Lawler watched with approval, the Lord of Light's unstoppable child standing vigilant in the night. Or perhaps it was just her own comfort, the knowledge that she was never truly alone, that Drogon, in his magnificence, understood her like no one else. Life had tested them, had stolen one of her children, but also granted them a power that banished the cold of hopelessness. The realm began to heal. Slowly but undeniably, the scars of war were tended to. Broken alliances were pieced together with careful negotiations, old grudges overshadowed by the fresh memory that unity had saved them all. Daenerys traveled between the north and the south, forging pacts, rebuilding roads, ensuring that food supplies reached the remotest corners. She was queen, but she was no tyrant. Her rule was marked by a fierce devotion to the common people, shaped by the knowledge of what had nearly befallen them. Jon handled much of the domestic intricacies in Winterfell, bridging the gap between the proud northern lords and Daenerys's new counselors. Whenever tensions rose, be it a dispute over territory or an old betrayal, there was always the hush that fell when Drogon was mentioned. Even from hundreds of miles away, his legend kept men in line. Some cynical minds griped that she ruled by fear. But the wise saw that respect and fear were not the same. She was beloved by those who lived through the endless winter, for she had saved them. Drogon's might was but a reminder that the queen they followed had the strength to keep the peace, to protect them from any new horror that might crawl out of the shadows. The memory of undead Viserion soon became something recounted in hushed voices, a warning of the nightmares that once walked the earth. Children of the next generation would hear how a golden dragon fell in the far north only to rise in unnatural service to the Night King. They would learn how a mother's heartbreak fused with divine flame to break the chains of death. In those stories, Daenerys and Drogon were heroes of an age when darkness nearly swallowed the world. Yet Daenerys rarely dwelled on those stories as heroic. To her, they were simply what needed to be done. She had stood at the brink, she had watched in horror as Viserion was torn from her, and she had made the choice to fight until her last breath. The fact that she had emerged victorious with Drogon at her side did not lessen the pain of her losses. But it did give her a clarity of purpose in ruling. Never again would she let complacency or petty squabbles tear the realm apart. Not while she had breath in her lungs and Drogon soared in the skies above. And so it was that time slipped onward. The horrors of the long night receded into history. Wheat fields grew tall under the milder suns of spring, harvests returned, villages were rebuilt. The name Drogon remained on the lips of many a bard, the black dragon who could not be harmed by winter's weapons. Some said he patrolled not just for Daenerys, but for the Lord of Light himself, ensuring that no new threat of ice or darkness would take root in the realm. Others spun fanciful yarns about how he had burned entire armies that tried to rebel, though the truth was far more grounded. Daenerys seldom used Drogon for force, except to quell the occasional outbreak of violence that threatened her efforts at peace. Still, the realm remembered. The people remembered. They remembered standing on the heights of the battered wall, seeing Drogon's fiery breath clash against Viserion's icy blasts. They remembered hearing the roar that signaled the fall of the Night King's greatest weapon. They remembered how the undead collapsed in droves, freed at last from their master's necromancy. They remembered the black dragon's roar of grief and triumph echoing across the tundra. They remembered the night the Lord of Light's chosen beast turned the tide of history. Daenerys and Jon grew into their leadership with humility, shaped by the knowledge of how fragile life truly was. Whenever new challenges arose, a famine in a far-flung region, bandits plaguing travelers on the King's Road, disputes among rival lords, they faced them with a determination tempered by the battle that had once threatened to end all battles. The memory of that victory gave them courage, a reminder that no matter how dire the odds, unity and resolve could prevail. And Drogon, for his part, kept a watchful eye on the realm from above, a sentinel no less vigilant than any guards on the battlements. Sometimes, Daenerys would awaken in the night from dreams of a swirling blizzard, the shriek of undead dragons in her ears. She would sit up in bed, her heart pounding. Then she would hear the gentle rumble of Drogon's breathing from outside the walls, and the nightmares would recede. Perhaps that was the legacy of that war. An unbreakable bond of fire and blood, forged in the crucible of despair and anointed by a god's flame. In the grand tapestry of Westeros's history, many kings and queens rose and fell. But the story of the unstoppable black dragon, enchanted by the Lord of Light, remained evergreen. People told it in taverns and noble halls alike, weaving it into the mythos of an age that once knew dragons as unstoppable but had never seen one quite so imbued with holy fury. Scholars wrote ponderous volumes analyzing how the magic might have worked, while devout priests in the Red Temple declared it a sign of R'hlloreth's enduring presence. Skeptics scoffed, calling it a political trick. But those who fought on the bloody fields beneath the wall knew the truth, had felt that furnace-like heat defy the most lethal cold. And nothing could take that truth from them. Years passed. Children who had been babes in arms during the long night grew into young adults, forging their own dreams. Many never witnessed the horrors firsthand, only the stories. The scars across the land healed, though some tragedies were never forgotten. One day, Daenerys stood atop the new fortifications built along the wall's remains. She wore a cloak trimmed with pale fur, the Targaryen sigil emblazoned on her chest, though its colors were slightly updated to reflect the new age, red and black and a subtle thread of gold in memory of Viserion. The cold winds still blew, but they lacked the biting sting of that endless winter. She surveyed the horizon with thoughtful eyes. Her gaze flickered up at the sound of enormous wings beating the air. Drogon descended, folding his wings with grace. He had grown larger still, if that were even possible. Some swore he rivaled Viserion the Black Dread in sheer magnitude. The ground trembled as he settled near her, a quiet rumble echoing in his chest. Daenerys reached up, resting a hand on his jaw, leaning close to speak in soft tones. He lowered his head, allowing her to breathe in the familiar heat. In that moment, she felt the weight of every battle, every sacrifice, every triumph. But she also felt a sustaining fire in her soul, one that matched the smolder in Drogon's eyes. The watchers on the wall were not afraid. They knew this dragon had seen him. Some of them had grown up hearing the story of how Drogon had saved them from the White Walkers. Others simply respected him as their queen's loyal companion. No one forgot that he had shattered the ice blasts of the Night King, that he had proven invulnerable to the darkest winter's chill. When Daenerys climbed onto his back and they rose into the sky, those who glimpsed the black silhouette against the clouds felt their hearts lift. They whispered prayers or offered thanks or simply marveled at the living embodiment of a power greater than human cunning. Above the clouds, Daenerys closed her eyes, letting the wind sweep over her. Drogon's wings beat with an even rhythm, carrying her higher and higher until Winterfell and the wall were mere dots below. The entire realm stretched out in a grand panorama, rolling hills, winding rivers, distant mountains crowned in wisps of cloud. She inhaled the crisp air. For a heartbeat, she thought she felt the presence of the Lord of Light, or perhaps merely the memory of that night's dreadful fight. A single tear slid down her cheek, and she let it fall without shame. When she opened her eyes, she pressed a hand to Drogon's scales. "Fly," she whispered. And Drogon flew. He soared above the domain they had fought so hard to protect, above the scars and the graveyards, above the farmland and the villages, above everything that had nearly been lost. His shadow swept the land like a gentle reassurance. No longer was it a portent of fear, but a testament that even in the darkest times, a spark of fire could light the way. Men, women, and children paused in their labors to watch, some shading their eyes against the sun as they pointed to the great black dragon overhead. In that moment, the memory of the long night seemed a distant nightmare, one they had survived because of a queen and her dragon who would not yield. Tucked away in Winterfell's libraries and King's Landing's archives would be the tomes that recounted the war for the dawn. Painted illustrations captured the moment Drogon unleashed a blaze that scattered Viserion's frosty breath into the swirling sky. A few especially fanciful sketches showed the exact instant the Night King's spear was turned aside by the shimmering aura of R'hlloreth's blessing. Scholars debated how it was done, how a single dragon could bend the forces of ice without succumbing. Priests claimed it was a sign that fire was the stronger force, triumphant over darkness. The maesters, suspicious of any spiritual explanation, insisted there must have been hidden factors in play. Boo! None disputed that Drogon had been at the center, a black sun radiating unstoppable heat. Those who had fought beneath the wall on that cataclysmic night, however, required no books or ballads. They carried the memory in their bones, the swirl of snow, the roar of dragons overhead, the rush of hope when the undead line faltered. In taverns, old veterans would tell wide-eyed listeners how they glimpsed Drogon's silhouette blazing through the falling snow, how he dived with unstoppable fury toward the undead Viserion, how the flames of R'hllor crowned his wings like a coronation of living light. They would say that the cold could not touch him, that even the Night King's frost broke upon him like waves on rock. And the young would shiver with excitement, imagining that day as though it were the greatest legend of their age. Daenerys knew that legends often grew beyond any single truth. But this one was rooted in an undeniable reality. Drogon had soared above the armies of the dead, impervious to the freezing curses of the White Walkers, and slain his undead brother at the very threshold of the realm's doom. Whatever else the world might say, no one could deny that final, terrible triumph. It changed the shape of the war. It saved the living from the endless winter. It proved that sometimes, in the face of insurmountable darkness, a single flame could burn hot enough to turn the tide. And so life went on, not in a fairy tale conclusion, but in a gradual process of rebuilding, healing, and forging new alliances. People found joy in marriages and births, in the turning of the seasons that now promised a real spring. Armies returned to their homelands, forging treaties that had once been unthinkable. The scars of war were there, but they were overshadowed by the potential of peace. Through it all, Daenerys walked with Drogon's roar echoing in her memory, that unstoppable flame a reminder of what they had conquered. She, a dragon queen, had once been a frightened girl who lost everything. She had been sold, humiliated, forced to flee across the sea. She had hatched dragons from stone and defied warlords, freed slaves, and locked horns with cunning queens. But nothing compared to standing face to face with the Night King's undead child, to commanding her last living child to burn away the hold of death itself. And Drogon had done it because they fought together, hearts aligned in a bond beyond mortal comprehension. In the quiet hours, sometimes Daenerys would place her hand over her heart and recall the feeling of Viserion's death, the anguish and anger that threatened to consume her. She would remember how Melisandre's voice rose in the stillness of that ritual, calling upon Lawler. She would remember Drogon's deafening roar, bright as the dawn, that signaled the birth of something more than just a dragon, something holy, something unstoppable. The memory was bittersweet, always tinged with sorrow for what had been lost, but also brimming with gratitude for what had been saved. If asked, Daenerys could not say for certain whether it was truly the Lord of Light who blessed Drogon, or if the Red Priestess had simply awakened a dormant magic within him. She did not know how the gods weighed the scales of men and dragons, or why some prayers were answered while others remained unheeded. But she had seen Drogon stand against an ancient evil that had felled lesser beings with a single icy breath, and she had watched his flames consume that evil from the sky. And that, to her, was miracle enough. In the end, as time wore on and kingdoms evolved, one truth remained constant. Drogon was the living flame in a world that had nearly frozen. He carried with him the memory of Viserion's undead shrieks, the sorrow of losing a brother, and the triumph of delivering a realm from the jaws of eternal night. He was a dragon, yes, but also a guardian, a symbol, and a testament to the fusion of mortal love and divine fire. Men would pass on, castles would crumble, and new powers would rise. But so long as Drogon and Daenerys lived, none would forget the night the Black Dragon, crowned by the Lord of Light, slew the monster that had once been Viserion, and stood invulnerable before the Night King's dread power. Nor would they forget that hope, like dragon fire, could blaze hot enough to melt the very essence of winter. That hope lived in every breath Drogon took, in every beat of Daenerys's heart, in every dawn that followed. And for a realm that had stood upon the brink of doom, that hope was a treasure beyond measure. The warmth that lit the darkness, the fire that defended life, the living proof that even in the coldest night, there burned a flame no ice could conquer. That hope lived in every breath Drogon took, in every beat of Daenerys's heart, in every dawn that followed the long night's end. It was a fragile, precious thing, a golden thread connecting the victories of the past to the possibilities of the future. And in the months that unspooled after the defeat of the Night King, that thread guided the people of the realm through the painstaking process of recovery. Villages flattened by the dead were rebuilt, fields once burned or frozen were replanted, and harbors that had been eerily silent found new life as trade resumed. Though the scars remained, life persevered with a fierce determination. Daenerys and Jon traveled the north extensively at first, ensuring that provisions reached every outpost and farmhold. Where roads had been destroyed or blocked by avalanches, they sent detachments of men to clear them. The nights were still cold, but those who worked in the dark hours kindled fires and drew strength from the knowledge that the worst of winter had passed. Snowdrifts that once loomed like silent harbingers of death now seemed ordinary, something that would eventually melt into spring. Those who remained from the Night's Watch aided in patrolling the tamed wildlands. Without the threat of whites, many free folk drifted farther north or settled in newly erected villages near the foot of the partially collapsed wall. The sense of a new start was palpable even as morning lingered in the shadows. At Winterfell, repairs had progressed enough that the castle's great courtyard could once again hold gatherings for hundreds of folk. Turrets destroyed or weakened by the White Walkers' assault were rebuilt using local stone. The halls echoed with the busy rhythms of blacksmiths forging new blades and wheelwrights hammering out repairs to wagons. An aroma of stew and bread filled the air when midday arrived, feeding both commoners and noble guests. Daenerys oversaw much of this from a vantage point on the higher walls. She sometimes stood there for an hour or more, cloak gathered around her, silver blonde hair braided tightly, simply watching the hustle of reconstruction. A small, private smile would sometimes tug at her lips. This was what she had fought for. Jon spent many hours alongside her, though he also vanished to deal with the more mundane tasks of rulership, settling boundary disputes, dispatching letters to reluctant southern lords, and checking on the newly constructed housing for the large influx of people who had sought refuge in the north during the war. When he could, he joined Daenerys upon those very same walls, the two of them silent yet bound by an intimacy of shared trials. At times, they would trade glances that spoke of countless memories, the battle at the wall, the swirling snow, the roar of dragons overhead. From that shared look, a quiet understanding passed between them, an acknowledgement that every quarrel they now faced, every frustration, was a blessing compared to the unstoppable nightmares of the long night. Though winter had by no means disappeared entirely, the temperature gradually rose. Thaw arrived earlier and more decisively than even the oldest northern residents could recall. The ephemeral glow of the midday sun felt like a gift. Puddles formed around Winterfell's courtyard and the black muck of churned soil appeared where pristine drifts once lay. Everyone remarked on how quickly the snows seemed to recede, as though the land itself sighed with relief now that the Night King's presence was gone. Maesters argued endlessly about the reasons. Some invoked the cyclical nature of seasons, others credited Targaryen magic. A few more open-minded scribes whispered that the removal of an ancient undead power had snapped some cosmic chain, letting the realm breathe again. Drogon took to patrolling at random intervals. He soared high above the winter-blue sky, a living shadow that caused children to scamper out to watch and guards to crane their necks. On days when he did not fly far, he remained perched on the castle outskirts, occasionally dozing in the sun. Despite his colossal size and terrifying appearance, the people of Winterfell had grown used to him. They no longer shrieked in alarm when his wingtips stirred up a whirlwind of dust, nor did they scatter if his tail accidentally slammed against a bit of the outer wall, sending stones crumbling. Instead, they regarded him with a kind of reverent respect. Sometimes, the braver children would inch closer, or toss him scraps of meat left over from their dinners. Though Daenerys made sure the children kept a respectful distance, Drogon's only reaction was a faint snort of steam when one particularly bold boy squeaked with excitement. Over time, this acceptance of Drogon trickled beyond the castle and into the surrounding villages. People told tales of how, at the height of the winter storms, they had seen him slicing through the sky, trailing that faint aura of heat that seemed to radiate from his obsidian scales. When a rumor arose that a small group of whites might have survived in a cave to the north, men set out to investigate, only to discover that Drogon had already passed overhead, burning the remnants to ash. No White Walkers were found, only the charred remains of a handful of undead stragglers that had somehow continued moving for a time after the Night King's fall. This new pattern repeated itself in the months following the war. Whenever rumors of leftover threats emerged, Drogon responded first, as though sensing the presence of foul magic, the faintest whiff of ice. He would return unscathed, leaving nothing but scorch marks behind. Daenerys often felt the closeness of their bond deepening. Through the blessings placed upon him by Lawler, Drogon was more than a dragon. He had become an extension of her will, or perhaps she had become an extension of his. In quiet moments, she would sit with him in the courtyard or on some lonely hillside, stroking his scales, speaking in hushed tones. She felt the heat radiate through her palm, a living pulse that quickened in response to her voice. Though she lacked the formal knowledge of the Red Priests or their arcane ways, she sensed that Drogon had been irrevocably changed. He was not mortal in the way of other beasts, or even in the way of other dragons as she had known them. Sometimes she wondered how Rhaegal might have changed if he, too, had experienced such a boon. But he was gone, lost in another desperate battle. That reminder never failed to twist at her heart. She found comfort in the knowledge that Drogon's power had been used only to protect. He had not turned into some unstoppable horror that scorched the innocent. He roamed the skies, an equal mix of guardian and deterrent. Those who might have once dreamt of rebellion or usurping her authority now thought twice, remembering how even the unstoppable Night King had failed to kill this black dragon. Some wrote bitter screeds in dusty corners, claiming that Daenerys ruled with fear alone. But those who actually dwelled in the north, who saw her among the people, who remembered her distribution of food during the war and her willingness to fight at the front, knew there was more to it. The realm had peace, tenuous though it might be, and that peace was built on a bedrock of mutual survival. For a while, the only disruptions came from the typical squabbles that plagued a land in recovery. Local lords bickering over property lines, caravans complaining about the increased tolls set by shaken communities seeking coin for their own rebuilding efforts. Wandering sellswords who had outlived their usefulness in the war. But no major uprising threatened to tear the realm apart. The Iron Throne in King's Landing remained empty of official occupant for longer than some aristocrats liked, while Daenerys and Jon lingered in the north, ensuring stability. Yet no one dared move to claim it without confronting the loyalty of the armies that still regarded Daenerys as the rightful queen. Whispers spread across the Crownlands. If anyone tried to seize the capital, they would find themselves face to face with the Black Dragon from the north, impervious to their defenses. So the seat of power lay in a peculiar limbo waiting for Daenerys' eventual arrival. As time marched on, letters bearing pleas arrived from lords in the Reach, from merchants in Old Town, from Dorne. They all requested Daenerys' presence, or at least official envoys, to clarify the realm's new governance. Questions of taxation, lines of succession, and trade expansions loomed. The ravages of the war against the dead had left fields untended and entire families displaced. Daenerys sensed she could not remain in the north forever, even though her heart felt at peace in Winterfell's sprawling courtyard. She knew she had to address these wider concerns if she wished to avoid future conflicts. And so, after careful planning and much discussion with Jon, she decided to travel south. When the day of departure came, a throng of people gathered in Winterfell's yard. They had grown accustomed to a queen in their midst, and many were reluctant to see her go. Yet they understood she was going to secure the realm's future to prevent the chaos of a fractured kingdom. Jon announced he would accompany her, though he intended to return north eventually, his bond to Winterfell and the northern folk unbreakable. Sansa and Arya, settled more comfortably now that the undead threat was gone, agreed to manage Winterfell in Jon's absence. Bran, ever distant and cryptic, offered a few quiet words suggesting that events were proceeding in alignment with the realm's best interests. No one fully grasped the deeper meaning behind his statement, but they accepted it. Drogon watched from the walls, perched like a gargoyle carved of living obsidian. When Daenerys approached him to mount up, the crowd parted in silent awe. She pulled herself into the saddle, every motion fluid from years of familiarity. Jon stood by, Longclaw sheathed at his hip, gazing up at her. Though he would ride on horseback with a modest retinue along the King's Road, Daenerys preferred to fly ahead, cutting travel time dramatically and allowing her to scout the path forward. She and Jon locked eyes, exchanging a silent vow to reunite frequently along the route. Then Drogon spread his massive wings and launched into the air, sending gusts of wind billowing across the courtyard. The cheers from below faded as the dragon's roar echoed across the towers. The flight south felt strangely nostalgic. Daenerys recalled the early days of her conquest, when she had soared over armies and fleets, carving a path of fire. But this time, there was no war, only scattered villages and small towns, their people curious and watchful. Some cheered, others bowed or knelt in reverence. From the sky, Daenerys could make out fields dotted with the bright green of new crops, roads where wagons rolled slowly, merchants plying what wares they had left. Occasionally, she glimpsed the scars of the undead invasion, burnt-out farmhouses, broken fences, piles of rubble. Yet new construction sprouted amid the debris, a testament to the realm's resilience. Drogon's presence overhead drew looks of apprehension, but Daenerys sometimes had him descend gently, letting people see that he was not there to terrorize them. She and Jon made their first major stop at Moat Cailin, where the old fortress was slowly being restored. Refugees from the war had gathered there, repairing walls and establishing a modest settlement. The presence of the Queen's party lifted spirits, and she spent hours listening to their needs, requests for seeds and farming tools, concerns about roads still clogged with ice. Drogon lounged outside the rebuilt gate, occasionally letting out a low rumble that startled passers-by. But soon children were creeping up to stare at him. Daenerys dismounted, kneeling in the muddy ground to reassure them that Drogon would not harm them. She could see the flicker of wonder in their eyes, reminiscent of her own first awakenings to the power of dragons. Jon oversaw the distribution of supplies they had brought, grain from the more fertile lands, small barrels of salt and dried meat. Every gesture affirmed that the Queen and her allies had not abandoned the frontiers of the north. The journey continued in this manner, the retinue stopping in various locales along the King's Road. Daenerys always rode Drogon in the sky, scouting ahead, while Jon managed the ground logistics, ensuring no pockets of undead or bandits lingered. Scouts reported little trouble. Whatever criminals once roamed these roads seemed to have fled in fear of the Black Dragon or the memory of the living armies that had marched north. Each evening, Daenerys settled with Drogon in a safe clearing, waiting for Jon's group to catch up. On some nights, they camped beneath the stars, while Drogon coiled protectively around the perimeter like a vigilant watchtower. The weather grew milder the farther south they ventured, though the nights still carried a brisk chill. Often, Daenerys drifted into a deep sleep lulled by the sound of Drogon's breathing, the glow of embers from their campfire dancing across his scales. She dreamt of dragons as they once were, 3 siblings, newly hatched, playing in the desert. She dreamt of the night sky alight with fire, and she woke with tears on her cheeks, the images of Regal and Viserion slipping from her mind like phantoms. The retinue reached the neck of the continent and moved beyond, crossing into the riverlands. Here, the signs of conflict had been more recent, armies clashing, lords changing allegiances. But the warmth of the season was undeniable, and the fertility of the land was apparent in the lush grass and the blossoming orchards. People were eager to see the queen who had fought the dead. Some simply needed someone to believe in, a symbol that the worst was behind them. Daenerys embraced that role with a measured grace, speaking to local leaders, forging alliances between small villages to share resources. At night, she wrote letters by flickering torchlight, instructing loyal advisors to send seeds and tools, to gather wagons of cut stone for reconstruction efforts, to recruit skilled masons to help fortify vulnerable settlements. Whispers followed her everywhere. They spoke of how her black dragon could not be harmed by the cold, how it had turned aside the Night King's spears of ice as though they were nothing. Some said Drogon was more than a dragon, that he was the living avatar of Lawler, the god of flame and shadow. Others claimed Daenerys had bargained with dark powers, trading her soul to bring victory. Daenerys paid these rumors little mind. She knew the truth was simpler. Melisandre had worked a spell that merged Drogon's draconic nature with a spark of the Lord of Light's essence. That was all. Yet she could not deny how grand and terrible it sounded when told as a story. She had witnessed firsthand the unstoppable might that poured from Drogon's jaws when Frost tried to aim him. Eventually, they approached Harrenhal, that sprawling ruin of a castle haunted by centuries of ill fortune. It loomed on the horizon, its melted towers a testament to Aegon the Conqueror's dragons. Birds wheeled in the sky, cawing in eerie refrain as Daenerys guided Drogon to circle over the broken walls. Many considered Harrenhal cursed, but she wished to see it with her own eyes once more, if only to remind herself of the Targaryen legacy. She landed in the courtyard, weeds sprouting through cracked stones. The retinue arrived hours later to a silent hush broken only by the rustle of crows. Jon found her examining the scorched towers, eyes tracing the blackened spires. "It all began with a dragon's fire here," Daenerys remarked softly, recalling the stories of how Harren the Black refused to yield until Aegon burned the castle walls. Aegon shattered Harren's legacy in a single night. And to think that was only the beginning of Targaryen power. Jon nodded, glancing around warily. Cursed or not, it's a reminder of what dragons can do. She let out a breath, her thoughts drifting to the horror of the long night. And what they've done for us. Not just fear and ruin, Drogon saved the world. I won't forget that. Jon placed a hand gently on her arm. Nor will anyone else. They left Harrenhal the following morning, the sun glinting off Drogon's scales as he soared back into the sky. The journey continued deeper into the riverlands, past scattered hamlets and farmland dotted with sheep. Everywhere they went, they saw signs of slow but steady recovery. Fewer half-collapsed barns, fewer desperate faces rummaging for scraps, more fields planted with new crops. The weight of the past winter lingered in the air, but the realm's heart was beating again. Soon, the outskirts of King's Landing came into view. Smoke curled from the chimneys of the sprawling city, and the hustle of trade was apparent in the throngs along the roads. Though the capital had seen its share of turmoil before the undead threat, the damage here was less catastrophic than in the north. The city had been spared a direct clash with the White Walkers, though many refugees had fled south and overwhelmed its capacity, creating pockets of poverty and desperation. Streets had become crowded, diseases spread more easily, and unscrupulous opportunists thrived. Yet as Daenerys flew over the city, she saw that it had not collapsed into chaos. People gathered at the markets, hawking produce, fish, clothing. Even from the sky, she could feel the sense of an uneasy normalcy. The old Red Keep still stood upon its rocky promontory, though the Iron Throne had remained unclaimed for far too long. Daenerys guided Drogon to land outside the city gates, rather than spooking the populace by descending directly into the courtyard. The sight of the black dragon made the guards tremble, but Daenerys had come in peace. Jon caught up on horseback, flanked by a small guard of northerners. Together, they entered King's Landing under a wave of gawking citizens. Some cheered. Others stared in silence, remembering the days of Targaryen power, days that had ended in fire and blood. Now, it seemed that power had returned, but forged by a woman who had cast aside the shadow of tyranny to fight the long night. Inside the Red Keep, Daenerys found many lords waiting, men who had lingered in the capital biding their time, uncertain when or if she would return. Among them were representatives from the Crownlands and even a few from the Reach. No longer was there a single established monarch or regent in King's Landing. The city had been in a state of uneasy caretaker rule. A council of mid-level officials managed day-to-day affairs, but they lacked the legitimate authority to unite the realm. The chamber in which the lords and ladies gathered felt tense, the air thick with curiosity and fear. Torches flickered on the stone walls, and the clank of armor echoed as the queen's retinue took positions at the periphery. Daenerys stood before them, shoulders back, gaze steady. Jon remained slightly behind her, a silent pillar of support. She knew this was the moment many had anticipated or dreaded, her return as the Targaryen queen who had allied with the North, whose unstoppable dragon had delivered them from the Night King. The memory of the war with Cersei lingered in many minds. What kind of ruler would Daenerys be now, having seen so much death? In a calm voice, Daenerys addressed them. She spoke of the war against the dead, how it had forged unity among former enemies. She spoke of the losses endured by every region. She acknowledged that the realm needed a strong, just leadership to heal the scars left behind. And she expressed her intention to take the throne, not as a conqueror but as the rightful heir and as a queen who had already proven her commitment to defending the living. She did not mince words about Drogon's power, but she also made it clear that no dragonfire would be unleashed unless met by treachery or brutality. Her voice echoed in the hall, and Jon's presence at her side underscored the alliance that would shape the realm going forward. Some lords seemed relieved. They had dreaded an endless power vacuum or a new wave of civil wars. Some were wary, remembering stories of the Mad King. Others quietly supported her, having lost faith in any alternative. When she finished, she invited them to speak. There was a moment of hushed uncertainty before one of the Crownlands' bannermen stepped forward and bent the knee, declaring that he would follow the queen who had saved them from the long night. A few more joined, while others hesitated, glancing around to gauge the room's temperature. But with each kneeling figure, the tide turned. Daenerys stood graciously, not reveling in the gesture, but accepting it as a necessity to secure the realm. In the weeks that followed, the formalities of establishing her rule in King's Landing took shape. The city itself was in disarray, with thousands of refugees still camped outside the walls, many lacking homes or prospects. Daenerys took immediate steps to organize relief efforts. She commanded that granaries be opened, that new shelters be constructed. She solicited help from the lords of the Reach, who possessed fertile lands less ravaged by the undead, to send grain shipments. In her councils, she listened to proposals for more systematic resettlement, distributing small parcels of land in the Crownlands or the Riverlands to those who had lost everything. Jon aided her in these affairs, though part of him yearned to return north. He knew Winterfell remained in capable hands with Sansa and Arya, yet he felt the pull of the land where he had grown up. Despite this, he threw himself into the tasks at hand, managing communications, quelling disputes between proud southern houses that refused to compromise. His honesty and straightforwardness often helped cut through the labyrinth of politicking that had choked King's Landing for generations. More than once, Daenerys watched him mediate an argument, a faint smile on her lips as she remembered how once, in the thick of the White Walkers' invasion, these same lords had refused to believe the dead were real. Now, they squabbled over taxes as if that were the greatest burden. Such was the relief of surviving the apocalypse. Drogon rarely ventured into the city, as there was little space for him to land without alarming the populace or damaging structures. Instead, he roosted on the broad hillside behind the Red Keep, near the burned remnants of the Dragon Pit. The ancient dome was still cracked and partially collapsed, but Daenerys had begun drafting plans to restore it, if only as a monument to what the dragons had once meant and what they now could mean again. Drogon circled the city at dawn and dusk, a solitary sentinel watching from on high. At night, Daenerys would sometimes climb a winding path to stand with him, laying her hand against his flank, gazing across the sprawling lights of King's Landing. In those quiet hours, she felt closest to the person she had been, the person who had believed wholeheartedly in forging a world without the cruelties that had shaped her life. She recalled the vow she had made to break the wheel. Though that vow had been tempered by the dire need to save the world from an undead threat, she had not abandoned it. One evening, as she ran her fingers over the smooth ridges of Drogon's scales, she heard a soft footstep behind her. She turned to see Jon, cloak rippling in the breeze, hair unbound. He came to stand beside her, gazing up at the dragon's enormous head. Drogon rumbled in recognition, exhaling a puff of warm air that ruffled Jon's cloak. "City's quiet tonight," Jon said softly, glancing down at the distant lanterns flickering along the streets. "Guess they're finally sleeping without fear. Or they're just tired of waiting for the next crisis." Daenerys studied his profile in the dim torchlight. "We've given them hope," she said, though a hint of weariness colored her tone. "I wonder if it's enough." Jon shifted slightly, turning to meet her eyes. "You and Drogon slew the Night King's undead dragon. You united the North and the South to fight for life. If that's not enough to prove your intentions, I don't know what is." She looked away, memory swirling. "Sometimes I still see Viserion in my dreams," she confessed, voice catching. "And I remember Drogon's roar when he tore into him. It felt like heartbreak and triumph all at once." Jon's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. The warmth of that simple touch steadied her. "I'm sorry," he said, voice soft. "We lost so much. But we are here, and we can ensure it wasn't in vain." Daenerys nodded, eyes stinging. She gently squeezed his hand before turning back to Drogon. "I wish I could rid myself of the guilt. Viserion was my child. I failed him." Jon didn't respond immediately. He looked at Drogon, the black scales reflecting the muted light. "You did all you could. The Night King was the one who turned Viserion. And Drogon ended his suffering in the only way possible. I understand how it must hurt. But maybe the best way to honor him is to build a world worthy of his memory." She let out a tremulous breath, leaning her forehead against Drogon's flank. The dragon rumbled low, a soothing vibration that seemed to pass from the monstrous body into her bones. "Yes," she whispered, more to herself than to Jon. "That's what we'll do." Time passed, and Daenerys's presence in King's Landing grew more firmly established. The messy business of crowning her officially as Queen of the Seven Kingdoms unfolded with a mixture of pomp and tension. Many of the southern houses, Tyrell remnants, Tarly loyalists, even some of the lesser Lannister branches arrived in the capital to witness and debate. Yet the final coronation ceremony was surprisingly modest. Daenerys insisted that funds go toward the city's rebuilding efforts rather than extravagant feasts. The day she was crowned, she wore a simple gown of black and red, her hair woven into a single braid, and only a modest circlet bearing the Targaryen sigil. The High Septon, newly appointed and more sympathetic to her cause, performed the rites in the Great September's ruins, where partial repairs were underway. The Great September was still half ravaged from the chaos of prior conflicts, but it was a symbolic place to mark a new beginning. When the crown touched Daenerys's head, a hush fell over the assembly. She glanced at Jon, who stood in the forefront of the gathered crowd, face solemn. Then she glanced at the open sky visible through the broken arches. A dark shape wheeled there, high above, Drogon, unseen by many but never absent. The new queen rose, turned to face her people, and declared her reign one dedicated to unity and healing. Cheers erupted, tentative from those who feared tyranny, fervent from those who revered her victory against the undead. Daenerys, head held high, felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest. She had come so far. There was no turning back. The following months were defined by relentless work. The capital required reorganization, from city watch reforms to the regulation of incoming refugees. Grain shipments needed to be routed to the poorest districts. The crown's finances, depleted by years of war and mismanagement, demanded careful stewardship. Daenerys found herself in council meetings from dawn until dusk, pen scratching across parchment as she refined edicts and brokered alliances between bickering lords. Sometimes, late at night, she would slip away to walk the halls alone, memories of the day's burdens swirling in her mind. She missed the simpler life she had known when traveling with her small Khalasar, or when she had roamed Essos as the breaker of chains. Yet she reminded herself that this was her calling now, to guide Westeros into a new era, one free from the horrors they had overcome. Jon proved invaluable, his knack for quiet leadership complementing her fiery determination. He listened patiently to the concerns of even the smallest lords, forging personal bonds. He had a gift for empathy that many recognized as distinctly Stark-like. While Daenerys took center stage as the queen, Jon moved behind the scenes, ensuring that no crisis went unnoticed. He also oversaw the integration of some free folk who had ventured south, seeking better farmland and new opportunities. Though many southern lords eyed these rugged northerners with suspicion, Jon's endorsement eased tensions. Bit by bit, the realm's fractures began to mend. One day, a raven arrived at the Red Keep bearing news. Melisandre had returned to the continent, traveling quietly among scattered survivors. Rumor had it she had ventured to Volantis after the battle, possibly to consult the Red Temple. Now, she was rumored to be north of King's Landing, near a small shrine dedicated to the Lord of Light. Daenerys felt a surge of conflicting emotion at the news. The Red Priestess had played a pivotal role in enchanting Drogon, but she was also an enigma, her faith entwined with shadowy visions. Daenerys considered seeking her out if only to better understand the lingering effects of Drogon's blessing. Yet she hesitated. Would Melisandre's presence stir more rumors of dark sorcery, undermining the fragile trust she had built? While she debated this, an even more urgent concern rose to the forefront. Reports trickled in from the western coast of the continent. Pirates and raiders, emboldened by the realm's exhaustion, had begun harassing port towns. Towns like Case and Lannisport experienced raids that took advantage of the weakened navies. Euron Greyjoy's faction had long been defeated, but other seafaring marauders thrived in the vacuum left behind. Ships carrying food and supplies were attacked, their cargo stolen or burned. In a realm still reeling from winter's harshness, such raids were devastating. Daenerys recognized it as a critical threat. If trade routes by sea became unsafe, everything she was building could collapse into famine and chaos. Discussions at court soon turned toward a naval presence, a matter complicated by the battered state of the royal fleet. Cersei's war had left many ships sunk or in disrepair. Shipwrights in the Crownlands struggled to rebuild, but progress was slow. Tyrion Lannister, once Daenerys's hand but now acting in an advisory capacity, offered strategic insights on how to handle the threat. Though he had parted from her service briefly before the war, he had returned after the Night King's defeat to aid in the reconstruction. He suggested forging alliances with coastal lords in the Reach and the Stormlands to muster a combined navy. Yet all agreed it would take time to train crews and arm vessels. Meanwhile, the raids continued, draining precious resources. What if Drogon were sent as a deterrent? One lord proposed in the council chamber, voice trembling with a curious mix of excitement and fear. A single sighting of him and the pirates would flee. Daenerys bristled at the suggestion. Memories of unleashing dragons on the Slavers' Bay fleets in Essos churned in her mind, scenes of fiery destruction. She did not want to revert to the days when her dragons were purely instruments of warfare. Yet she could not ignore the realm's urgent need. If these pirates ravaged the coastline unimpeded, thousands would starve. Jon, standing at her side, spoke quietly. It's worth considering a show of strength. If Drogon can chase them off with minimal bloodshed, it might save lives in the long run. She regarded him, conflicted. I've spent so long trying to prove that Drogon is more than a weapon. But if we do nothing, more people suffer. Tyrion cleared his throat. A carefully planned demonstration might be all that's needed. Sweep across the coast, burn a pirate ship or two in a decisive but contained manner, and the rest will scatter back to wherever they came from. Daenerys did not relish the idea, but she saw the logic in it. The realm was not yet stable enough to engage in a prolonged naval campaign, and letting the raiders run rampant was out of the question. She finally nodded. We'll do it. But I want minimal loss of life. If they flee, I'll let them go. I won't become a tyrant scorching ships indiscriminately. The council agreed and preparations began. Drogon's presence at the coast would need to be coordinated with allied ships that could secure any fleeing pirates. Ravens were dispatched to lords in the Westerlands and the Reach, requesting cooperation in patrolling the seas near their shores. Jon volunteered to accompany Daenerys, both to act as a liaison and to provide a sense of stability in the negotiations. The plan was swiftly set in motion. The day came for Daenerys to take flight again, this time heading west. She rose before dawn, dressing in a practical outfit of leather breeches and a warm cloak pinned by a dragon sigil. Jon, similarly equipped for travel, met her in the courtyard. Tyrion stood by, arms folded, exchanging last-minute updates about the movements of the allied ships. Grey Worm, commander of the Unsullied, oversaw a small detachment of soldiers who would follow by land. Daenerys placed a reassuring hand on Grey Worm's shoulder, recalling their shared history through so many battles. She wanted him in King's Landing to maintain order during her brief absence. By sunrise, she was in the sky with Drogon, wings cutting through golden light. Jon rode below with a handful of mounted guards, planning to rendezvous at one of the coastal strongholds. The sense of purpose thrummed in Daenerys's veins. Even as she lamented using Drogon in a martial capacity, she recognized that this was the cost of ruling to protect her people from immediate threats. The flight across the Crownlands and into the Reach was swift. From above, Daenerys spotted rivers meandering through fields that were now lush with new growth. She passed over the Blackwater Rush, glimpsing farmers toiling in the distance. Sometimes she wondered if they looked up at the Black Dragon and felt afraid or if they saw hope instead. By midday, the shoreline came into view, the waves glittering under the sun. Fishing villages dotted the coast, piers jutting into the sea. She landed Drogon near a modest fortress that overlooked a rocky bay where allied ships bearing the sigils of House Tarly and House Redwine were anchored. A flurry of activity followed, with banners snapping in the wind and men rushing about to prepare for the campaign against the pirates. Jon and his retinue arrived 2 days later, dusty from the road but determined. They conferred with local lords, exchanging reports on pirate sightings. Some said the raiders traveled in small, fast ships that harried merchant vessels. Others claimed a larger flotilla lurked just beyond the horizon. Daenerys decided that the best tactic was to scout the coastline by air, forcing the pirates to reveal themselves. She would attack only if they threatened further violence or refused to flee. Riding Drogon over the sea was a stark change from over land. The wind whipped salt spray toward her face, the expanse of water shimmering under the sun. Drogon seemed unbothered by the shift, wings beating with the same steady rhythm. The first day, she saw no sign of pirates, only a few fishing boats that hurried back to shore upon spotting the immense black silhouette overhead. She noted how different the world looked from up here, endless waves merging with a pale horizon. On the second day, word reached Jon that a merchant ship had been attacked just an hour's sail from their position. Daenerys took flight immediately, scouring the waters. Finally, she spotted a trio of ships flying black sails with no heraldry. They had cornered a smaller vessel near a rocky outcrop, likely intending to board and plunder it. Daenerys felt her heart tighten with anger. Already, she saw the flicker of flames on the merchant ship's deck as the pirates tried to burn it. The merchants aboard waved frantic arms, jumping overboard into rowboats. Drogon descended in a swift, powerful dive. The pirates looked up, eyes going wide with horror. Daenerys guided Drogon to unleash a warning roar, an ear-splitting bellow that rattled sails. She had planned to give them a chance to flee. But when she saw archers on the pirate decks aiming arrows at the merchant survivors, her restraint snapped. She shouted for Drogon to strike, heart pounding with a fury reminiscent of her earlier campaigns. The Black Dragon inhaled, chest expanding, and sent a jet of flame that engulfed the pirate ship's mast. Wood exploded in a torrent of sparks and ash. Sailors screamed, dropping their weapons to dive into the water. The second pirate vessel tried to turn away, hoisting sails in a desperate bid to escape. Daenerys spurred Drogon forward, exhaling another wave of fire across the water's surface, creating a scorching barrier. The heat was so intense that the sea itself steamed. A few pirates managed to leap overboard, flailing in the swirling currents. Daenerys reined Drogon in, forcing the flame to cease. She did not intend to slaughter them all, only to ensure they never again raided innocent ships. A roar from behind alerted her that the Allied fleet was closing in, sweeping up any who survived the fiery assault. The third pirate ship turned tail, vanishing beyond a rocky promontory. Daenerys let it go, satisfied that the survivors would carry tales of what they had witnessed. She circled above, scanning for any more threats. The merchant vessel burned, but the crew had abandoned it, and Allied ships rushed to douse the flames or rescue survivors. Overhead, the acrid scent of charred wood and salt brine mingled, clinging to her nostrils. She felt a surge of old memories, a mixture of triumph and a pang of remorse for the destruction. This was the raw power of a dragon unleashed. That evening, Daenerys landed Drogon on the beach where Jon and the Allied lords had gathered to assess the aftermath. Smoke still curled from the wreck of the pirate ship, listing half-sunken offshore. Salvagers worked to recover what they could, while chain-bound prisoners were herded onto shore. Some had burns, others coughed from inhaling smoke. The local lords planned to deliver them to justice or at least imprison them. Daenerys did not interfere. She only reminded them that no cruelty or torture would be tolerated on her watch. Let them stand trial or face banishment. The message was clear: she sought to deter piracy, not revel in conquest. Jon approached as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and purples. Droplets of seawater clung to his hair, and he wore a weary expression. We intercepted a few more small ships further down the coast. They fled at the sight of our sails, so I'd say your demonstration was effective. Daenerys nodded, her gaze on the drifting wreckage. I won't relish the killing, but I won't allow these raiders to terrorize innocent people. Jon's eyes reflected empathy. You did what had to be done. She studied him, remembering the many times they had faced horrors side by side. How many more times must we do what has to be done before we can simply live? Jon exhaled. I wish I knew. They spent several more days patrolling the coastline. Drogon's mere presence was enough to scatter most remaining pirate vessels, and the allied ships apprehended those too slow or foolish to run. Word of a black dragon that was supposedly impervious to ballista bolts and sorcery circulated among the outlaws, fueling panic. Daenerys felt uneasy at the glorification of Drogon's might. She knew all too well the price that had been paid for that immunity. Yet if fear of the unstoppable black dragon kept innocent lives safe, she would bear that burden. When at last the coast seemed secure, Daenerys and Jon prepared to return to King's Landing. They parted from the local lords, ensuring that a system was in place to maintain vigilance. New watchers would be stationed at key coastal points to raise an alarm if raiders returned. The Allied fleet would remain on patrol as it continued to rebuild. The pirate threat had not been wholly eliminated, but it had been significantly curbed, buying the realm vital breathing room. The lords thanked Daenerys profusely, bowing in reverence whenever Drogon soared overhead. She accepted their gratitude, albeit with a stoic reserve, mindful that every demonstration of force risked renewing the old fear of dragons. The journey back was swift and uneventful. Daenerys flew while Jon rode, reconvening nightly at modest camps. Each evening they fell into conversation about what they had accomplished, what still needed to be done, and the burden of power that weighed upon them both. Daenerys confessed that sometimes she felt the realm's many problems pressing against her, threatening to crush her spirit. Jon reminded her that they were not alone, that they had allies, that the realm itself was healing bit by bit. When she lay down to sleep, she often felt Drogon's comforting presence in the near distance, a silent watchful flame in the dark. Upon their return to King's Landing, they found the city bustling with fresh energy. Nobles and officials who had witnessed the success of the coastal campaign seemed more confident in the Queen's rule. They had heard of how quickly and decisively she had acted, using the minimal necessary force to ward off threats. The common folk, too, felt an easing of tension, less fear that bandits or pirates would sweep in to exploit the realm's weakened state. Daenerys took note of the improved atmosphere but refused to let it lull her into complacency. She recognized that other challenges would arise soon enough. The realm was vast, and history had taught her that conflict lurked in every corner. Reports arrived from the north, where Sansa Stark governed Winterfell with an even hand. She had successfully negotiated trade agreements with White Harbor to rebuild the port and fortify the shipping lanes in the Narrow Sea. Arya had embarked on journeys beyond the northern borders, scouting the wildlands for any sign of roving threats. She wrote letters describing the icy tundra and the slow but steady departure of the harsh winter that had once gripped the region. Most White Walkers had crumbled to dust with the Night King's demise, but Arya remained vigilant, determined never to let such an evil catch them unaware again. Daenerys took heart in these reports. She had grown fond of Sansa's frankness, and though they had once clashed, they now understood each other's strengths. The war had forced them to reconcile their differences, forging a mutual respect. The same was true of many alliances that had once seemed impossible. Houses that had been mortal enemies found common ground in the fight for survival, and that unity, though fragile, persisted in the new dawn. Despite these positive developments, Daenerys could not shake an underlying sense of restlessness. The realm might be stable for now, but she felt the weight of every life that depended on her decisions. She could not simply rest upon the laurels of having vanquished the undead and curbed a handful of pirates. The dream she had once carried of breaking the wheel nagged at her. She had abolished slavery in Essos, but in Westeros the feudal system remained, with lords and vassals and countless peasants living at the mercy of their overlords. True, the horrors of the Long Night had momentarily unified them, but the old hierarchies still existed beneath the surface. Late one night, she stood on a balcony overlooking the city, arms folded against a cool breeze. The torches along the streets below winked like fireflies. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Missandei approaching, her trusted confidant from the days in Essos. Missandei's expression was gentle, her dark eyes reflecting concern. "My queen," Missandei said, inclining her head slightly. "I see you're troubled." Daenerys offered a wan smile. "I'm thinking of what comes next. We've survived the Night King, we've quelled raids, but is this enough? Have we truly made the realm better, or have we just postponed new conflicts?" Missandei stepped closer, placing a comforting hand on Daenerys' arm. "You've brought hope to people who had none. They speak of you as the protector who fought the dead, who freed them from fear." "Hope is fleeting," Daenerys murmured. "I don't want to simply protect them, I want to change the world so that they don't need my protection." Missandei's gaze flicked across Daenerys' face, understanding her ambition. "You once spoke of breaking chains in Essos. Perhaps Westeros is another kind of chain. It won't be undone in a single generation, but what you're doing now could be the start." Daenerys smiled, touched by the reminder of her earlier crusade. We made great strides in Meereen, but I also recall the chaos that followed. The sons of the Harpy rose to resist us. It took so much bloodshed to keep that city free. Missandei's hand remained steady. Change is always met with resistance. But the difference now is that you have unified much of Westeros behind you. The crown is not precarious. People believe in you. Daenerys exhaled, letting her eyes wander over the city's rooftops. Then we must act wisely. Implement changes that can outlast me. Education, relief for the poor, representation for those who have no voices. And yet, even the simplest ideas threaten the power of entrenched lords. Missandei nodded. It will take time and care. But you are not alone. Jon Snow, Tyrion, Davos, so many stand with you. And Drogon, his presence ensures that anyone thinking to sabotage your reforms must consider the cost. The mention of Drogon brought a faint chuckle from Daenerys. Yes, I suppose so. Though I never wanted him to be used as a symbol of fear. She paused, voice softening. I wonder what Viserion would think if he could see what we're building. Missandei's expression grew solemn. He'd be proud, my queen. All your children would. Daenerys swallowed the lump in her throat, nodding. Thank you, Missandei, for your counsel and your friendship. Missandei offered a reassuring smile. Always. They stood there together, quietly absorbing the night air, the hush of the city below. The conversation reignited Daenerys's resolve. She was a queen, yes, but also a visionary who believed in a better world. The pieces were in place to begin shaping Westeros into something more just. And if old powers fought back, well, she had faced worse. Drogon's unstoppable flame was a deterrent. But more importantly, she had the loyalty and goodwill of those who had bled alongside her in the long night. And so began the next phase of Daenerys's reign. A gradual transformation of Westeros from within. She convened councils of wise lords and common folk alike, listening to the grievances of farmers, fishermen, artisans, those whose voices were rarely heard in the halls of power. She established traveling magistrates to bring fair judgment to distant hamlets. She encouraged the founding of new schools to educate even the lowborn children, hoping that knowledge would empower them. She pressed the wealthy houses to fund roads, bridges, and aqueducts, promising them recognition and trade benefits in return. Where possible, she sought peaceful persuasion, using her personal presence and example to win hearts and minds. Some lords grumbled. They argued that these efforts interfered with the traditional structures of feudalism, that a queen had no right to meddle in their internal affairs. Daenerys met them with calm determination, reminding them that the entire realm had banded together for survival. Now they must band together for prosperity. Quietly, she let it be known that any open rebellion would be met by the might of her armies, and, if necessary, the black dragon whose flame had once melted the coldest ice. She rarely had to make the threat explicit. The memory of Drogon's immunity to the Night King's spear remained a potent cautionary tale. Jon helped smooth tensions, visiting reluctant houses in person, appealing to their sense of honor. We bled together at the wall, he'd say. When the dead came, differences mattered little. Are we really so quick to forget that unity now? His reputation as a Stark, combined with the legends of his role in the Great War, carried weight. More often than not, the lords relented, if only to avoid direct conflict. Still, pockets of resentment brewed beneath the surface, especially among those who saw their power base threatened by Daenerys's progressive policies. One late autumn evening, Daenerys received word of a small rebellion taking root in the Stormlands. Minor lords, embittered by new taxes that funded public works, had rallied a few hundred men to defy the crown's authority. They raided caravans carrying supplies intended for the populace, claiming to act in defense of their ancestral rights. At first, Daenerys was inclined to let local forces handle the matter, but the violence escalated, reports arriving of villages sacked and peasants killed. She realized she could not ignore it. This was more than a tax protest. It was a direct attack on her reforms and her people. She called the banners from nearby regions, marshalling a moderate force to restore peace. Jon prepared to lead the ground troops, while Daenerys prepared to bring Drogon if necessary. Though the rebels were few, she did not underestimate them. One spark could ignite a larger flame if not addressed swiftly. Before they marched, Daenerys made a plea for the rebels to surrender, promising mercy if they laid down arms. The response came back soaked in venomous scorn, insults hurled at the Targaryen usurper and her monstrous lizard. They refused any negotiations. Daenerys set out with a heavy heart but with the firm conviction that she must defend those too weak to defend themselves. The autumn sky was gray, rain threatening to fall at any moment. Her retinue included a mix of northerners, Stormlanders loyal to her, and the Unsullied. Jon led the cavalry, scanning the terrain. They arrived near the edge of a forested region in the Stormlands where the rebels had entrenched themselves, converting a small castle into their stronghold. Scouts reported signs of siege weapon construction, makeshift catapults intended to counter a dragon. Daenerys landed Drogon on a ridge overlooking the fortress. She studied the walls, noting the newly erected ballista. Even from a distance, she saw them pivot upward, aiming at the black shape perched on the rock. Though she knew Drogon was largely resistant to normal weaponry, the rebels' defiance troubled her. She recalled Qyburn's scorpions once injuring Rhaegal during the war with Cersei. But that had been a well-crafted weapon of the best blacksmiths in King's Landing. These seemed crude by comparison. Still, caution was wise. She preferred not to test Drogon's might recklessly. She ordered the troops to encircle the fortress, cutting off escape routes. A final call for surrender was delivered, but the rebels answered with arrows that bounced off the unsullied shields. Daenerys sighed, her blood simmering with anger. It was madness. After everything the realm had endured, after the victories and the hope, here were men so blinded by pride and fear of change that they spilled innocent blood. She inhaled, feeling Drogon's flanks expand beneath her legs. He sensed her tension, letting out a low growl. Jon, standing with a group of knights at the perimeter, raised a horn to his lips and sounded a single, resonant note. That was the signal for the assault. The loyal forces advanced, shields locked, while archers loosed volleys over the walls. The rebels fired back, but lacked the skill and discipline of the Queen's troops. Daenerys observed from Drogon's vantage point, withholding his flame unless absolutely necessary. She wanted to minimize destruction of property and lives. The fortress belonged to the crown and countless farmers lived around it. Burning it to the ground would only create more refugees. But if the rebels refused to yield, she might have no choice. Within minutes, the loyal troops had reached the outer gate, ramming it with a heavy wooden beam. Arrows rained down from the parapets. Some men fell, clutching at wounds, but the formation held. Daenerys felt the urge to swoop down and end the conflict in a single, terrifying pass of dragon fire. Yet she remembered the vow she had made to rule justly, to not rely on brute force except as a last resort. She waited. Jon spurred his horse, urging the men forward. The gate shuddered under repeated blows. Atop the fortress walls, she saw frantic movements, rebels rushing to align the ballista, their faces twisted in defiance. They released the first bolt. It soared through the air, curving slightly off course. Daenerys watched it fly harmlessly overhead, then thud into the forest behind her. A second shot came closer, forcing Drogon to shift, but it still missed. Their craftsmanship was poor, their skill even poorer. The men reloaded, cursing and fumbling. She did not fear for herself, but for the loyal soldiers below. If a bolt went astray and landed among them, the casualties could be devastating. Finally, the gate splintered. Loyal forces poured into the courtyard. The clash of steel echoed as the rebels tried to form a defense. Daenerys heard battle cries, the ring of swords, the screams of the wounded. She clenched her jaw, feeling every death as a weight on her conscience. The men inside that fortress were her subjects, misled by rebellious lords. She had offered them mercy and they had spat on it. Suddenly, a group of rebels emerged on the battlements, dragging forward a contraption that looked like an oversized scorpion. Daenerys recognized the design from the war with Cersei. So they did have at least one decent siege weapon. A rebel with a distinctive plumed helmet aimed the scorpion at Drogon, adjusting the mechanism with a determined glare. Daenerys hissed under her breath. She had hoped to avoid involving Drogon, but the threat to him and to the men below was now too great. A single well-placed bolt could cause a bloodbath if it shattered the ranks or pinned Drogon's wing. She guided him into the air with a surge of muscle and wing, ascending above the fortress. The rebel scorpion fired, the bolt whistling past Drogon's side, missing him by mere feet. Daenerys inhaled sharply. She had no more illusions about the rebels' intentions. They would kill her and Drogon if they could. Steeling herself, she urged Drogon into a dive. Fire raged in his throat, the heat radiating so intensely she could feel it warming her entire body. She targeted the scorpion first, unleashing a burst of dragon flame that engulfed the battlements. Wood, rope, and men alike were set ablaze. Some rebels flung themselves to the courtyard below, preferring broken bones to the dragon's inferno. Screams pierced the air. She guided Drogon in a sweeping arc, aiming to avoid the main body of the fortress. The next wave of flames scorched the outer wall, preventing any retreat or reinforcement from that side. Smoke billowed, darkening the sky. Below, loyal forces seized the moment. They pressed harder, overwhelming the rebels. Some threw down their weapons in terror as Drogon roared overhead, the sound a harbinger of unstoppable wrath. Others fought to the last breath, clinging to the twisted notion that the Targaryen queen must be overthrown. Daenerys heard the clang of swords echo through the courtyard, mingling with the crackle of fire and the acrid stench of burning timber. In less than half an hour, it was over. The fortress gates lay in splinters, the rebel scorpion melted to slag. Ash drifted through the courtyard like snow. Bodies littered the stones, both rebels and loyal soldiers. Daenerys landed Drogon near the collapsed gate, scanning the scene with grim finality. Her men scrambled to secure prisoners, dragging them out of smoldering corners. A few pockets of flame burned where the walls had caught fire. She signaled for the bucket brigades to put them out. She did not want the entire fortress reduced to rubble. This was no celebratory conquest, it was a sad necessity. Jon dismounted near her, sword dripping with blood. His face was drawn, eyes haunted. They wouldn't listen, he said hoarsely. Every chance we gave them, they refused. She exhaled slowly, grief mingling with relief. We've ended this rebellion before it could spread. That's the only solace I can take. Jon nodded, looking around. Smoke curled in the damp air. The moans of the dying weighed on them both. Let's see if we can save whoever's left. Daenerys dismounted, her legs trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Drogon stood guard as she and Jon walked through the ruined courtyard. Loyal soldiers saluted her respectfully, though none seemed to rejoice in the victory. It was a grim business. She found the rebel leader among the prisoners, an older man with burning hatred in his eyes. He spat at her feet, cursing her name. She gazed at him, remembering once again the scene when she had offered mercy. You caused the deaths of your own people, she said quietly, voice like steel. And for what? He only snarled. We won't be ruled by a dragon queen who thinks to tear down our traditions. Better to die free than live in your thrall. She felt a cold pang in her stomach. How many times had she heard similar words from slavers in Essos, men who would not give up their old ways of tormenting others? Your traditions involve hoarding power and resources while those beneath you starve, she said, her anger barely contained. That is not freedom. It's oppression. He spat again but had no retort that made sense. Jon stepped forward, fists clenched, but Daenerys laid a hand on his arm. She could see the man's fate written in his eyes. He would prefer death to any compromise. She turned away, giving orders for the rebels to be tried. Those who had participated in the violence willingly would face sentences in the Queen's courts. Those who had been coerced might earn leniency. She left the details to her commanders and turned back to Drogon, needing the comforting assurance of his presence. The fortress was secured by nightfall. The fires had been doused and the wounded were tended to as best they could be in the chaos. Daenerys stood with Jon by the walls, gazing out at the dark forest. Smoke clung to the air, and the ground felt soaked in sorrow. She brushed her hair back from her face, exhaustion evident in her features. Jon tentatively placed a hand on her shoulder, hesitant but comforting. She leaned against him, letting out a breath that trembled. I hate this. He wrapped an arm around her. I know. They remained like that for a moment, the hush of night broken by distant murmurs of soldiers going about their duties. Eventually, Daenerys pulled away gently, gazing into Jon's eyes. Sometimes I wonder if all rulers feel this way. If the burden grows heavier with each life taken. Jon's voice was low. Good rulers do. It's the ones who don't feel it we should fear. She closed her eyes, recalling the madness of her father, the tyranny of Cersei. I must remember that. In the morning, they left a garrison behind and returned to King's Landing, the taste of ashes still in Daenerys's mouth. News of the rebel defeat spread quickly, quashing any immediate thoughts of further uprisings. Some praised her decisive action, while others whispered that she had once again answered defiance with dragonfire. Daenerys did not relish the rumors, but she knew that was the reality of being a Targaryen queen. And so the realm continued, edging forward in reconstruction with the memory of war and rebellion never too far behind. Weeks slipped into months and Daenerys's reign slowly took shape. She could see tangible progress in the roads, the distribution of food, the establishment of fairer courts. She received delegations from Essos seeking renewed trade. She welcomed scribes from Old Town, encouraging them to spread literacy. At times, she even consulted with the maesters about the best ways to prevent famine or disease. In all these endeavors, Drogon loomed as a silent sentinel, a living reminder of the extraordinary power that had saved the realm from the Night King and could, If needed, save it from any lesser threat. And yet, in quieter hours, Daenerys felt restless again. She found herself dreaming of open skies and wide plains, missing the freedom of flight without the weight of a crown. Once, she asked Jon if he wished they could vanish into the wilderness, leaving the burdens of rulership behind. He gave her a small smile and admitted the temptation, but reminded her that the realm needed them. That sense of duty was their anchor and their chain. It was in this state of mind that Daenerys received an unexpected visitor. Melisandre, the Red Priestess. Late one evening, a guard entered the throne room, where Daenerys had been reviewing petitions. He announced that a woman in red robes, with hair like living flame, requested an audience. Daenerys felt a chill of recognition. She signaled to let the priestess enter. Melisandre appeared, looking older, as though the final battle had drained her. Yet her eyes still burned with an inner fire. She bowed her head, offering formal courtesies. Daenerys dismissed most of her retinue, retaining only a few trusted guards and Jon, who stood near. The Red Priestess approached slowly, the torchlight dancing on her red robes. "My queen," Melisandre began, voice soft yet carrying a certain resonance. "I have come to see what our Lord of Light has wrought in these days since the long night's defeat." Daenerys regarded her with guarded curiosity. "We have been rebuilding, and Drogon remains changed, as you know." Melisandre nodded, her gaze flicking to Jon for a moment. "Yes, the anointed dragon still carries the flame of R'hllor. I sense it even now, a deep current of power. Have you learned more of what it means?" Daenerys hesitated, recalling how Drogon seemed to sense remnants of undead or cold magic, how he seemed impervious to winter's chill. "Only that his flames can banish any cold. He's not grown weaker, if that's what you're asking." Melisandre's lips curved in a faint smile. "Nor will he, for that fire is not easily extinguished. But it is bound to a purpose, the same purpose that once guided us all. To fight the great other, the darkness that seeks to consume life." Jon's voice was stiff. "The Night King is gone, and with him the White Walkers." Melisandre inclined her head. "True for now, but the wheel of time turns. We cannot say what shapes the darkness may assume in centuries to come." Daenerys felt her heart clench. "Are you saying a new threat will arise?" "Not soon, I think," Melisandre replied, her tone thoughtful. "But darkness is never truly gone. One day, long after we are dust, the great other may stir again. And Drogon's line, 'If dragons still live,' may be needed. That is why I am here, Your Grace, to remind you that this blessing carries a responsibility." Daenerys took a measured breath. She had wondered about the future of dragons. Drogon was the last known living dragon in Westeros. If he sired no offspring, the line would end with him. "I understand," she said quietly. "But how do we ensure dragons endure? There are no mates left for Drogon." Melisandre's eyes flickered with that old mysticism. One can never be certain what eggs or remnants might exist in the world. Magic is awakened anew. R'hllor's flame has spread far. Perhaps in time, dragons may be reborn if the realm is ready. Daenerys exchanged a look with Jon, who wore a pensive frown. "We can't conjure dragons from thin air," he said, skepticism coloring his voice. Melisandre shrugged gracefully. "No, but you can prepare the realm for their return, ensuring that knowledge of them is preserved, that the scars of the long night are not forgotten. And you, my queen, can remain vigilant. Drogon is your shield against any lingering shadow. If pockets of cold magic ever stir, you must be ready." Daenerys thought of the scoured caves in the far north, of how Drogon had sought out whites. "We will be," she said with quiet conviction. Melisandre bowed her head. "That is all I wish to hear. The Lord of Light guided me back to remind you and to see what has become of my final service in the war." Daenerys studied her face. "What will you do now?" A touch of weariness haunted Melisandre's features. "I will wander as I have always done, carrying the flame of R'hllor wherever darkness might gather. When the time comes, I will lay down my life, as we all must." She paused, eyes flicking to the distant windows. "Though perhaps I have a little more to do before then. The prophecy said the prince or princess who was promised would bring the dawn. We have seen the dawn, yes, but the light must be tended." Daenerys felt a stirring of compassion. She remembered the fervor in this priestess's eyes, the unwavering devotion. "I wish you well," she said softly, "and I thank you for what you did." Melisandre bowed deeper. "May the Lord of Light guide your path, Daenerys of House Targaryen. May you rule justly and guard the flame that cannot be snuffed out." Her gaze flicked to Jon. "And you, king in the north that was, who played your part to perfection." Jon offered a curt nod, the weight of many battles reflected in his eyes. "Farewell," he murmured. With that, Melisandre took her leave, disappearing into the torchlit corridors. Daenerys stared after her, heart full of questions that might never be answered. She wondered if the Red Priestess was right, if the realm would again face some incarnation of darkness in the distant future. The thought weighed on her, but she took comfort in knowing Drogon's flame was still there, smoldering with an eternal vigilance. Days later, Daenerys ascended the steps of the Red Keep's highest battlements, seeking a moment of solitude. The city stretched out below, bustling with life. Ships came and went in the harbor, carrying goods from Dorne to the Vale, from the Westerlands to the Stormlands. The realm's heart was beating, and for the most part it was at peace. She leaned on a stone parapet, the wind teasing strands of silver-blonde hair from her braid. In the distance, she glimpsed Drogon's shape perched on a hillside where a flock of sheep grazed nervously at a distance. A subtle footstep behind her announced Jon's arrival. He joined her at the parapet, resting his forearms on the stone. For a while, they said nothing, simply taking in the view. At length, Jon spoke, his voice low. "She's gone, the Red Woman. Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Daenerys shook her head. "I doubt it. She seems to have served her purpose. Perhaps she'll find some new cause." Jon nodded, staring at the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever truly be free of prophecies and omens." Daenerys turned to him, a faint smirk curving her lips. "You sound weary of fate." He exhaled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "We've lived our whole lives under some shadow or another. But maybe we can shape the future ourselves." She placed a hand on his arm. "That's what we're doing, Jon. Day by day." He looked at her then, and she saw admiration mingled with concern. "It weighs on you. The throne, the changes you're pushing for, everything." She nodded, letting a hint of vulnerability show. "It does. But it also gives me purpose." Jon took her hand, turning it palm up in his own. "If the darkness returns someday, it won't be our burden alone. We've set things in motion that may outlast us." A gentle gust of wind tugged at their hair. Daenerys squeezed Jon's hand. "I know. And for now, all we can do is keep guiding Westeros toward a better path." They fell quiet again, watching as the sun sank, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The ocean beyond the city walls reflected the sunset in rippling gold. Daenerys inhaled the salt-tinged air, feeling a calm settle over her. Far below, she heard the distant murmur of the crowd, the clang of blacksmiths, the laughter of children playing in the streets. This was life, thriving in the wake of unimaginable horrors. And at its heart, Drogon's unstoppable flame, once the key to victory against the Night King, now served as a beacon, reminding friend and foe alike that the realm had a protector who could not be touched by the cold. The memory of undead Viserion remained a wound in Daenerys's heart, but also a testament to the lengths she and Drogon had gone to save this land. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, Daenerys continued her tireless efforts to knit the Seven Kingdoms into a cohesive, more equitable whole. She traveled periodically, sometimes with Jon, sometimes with a smaller retinue, to see firsthand the progress in each region. She visited Dorne, forging new trade pacts. She journeyed to Highgarden, where the Tyrell lineage had been all but wiped out, to ensure the once fertile fields were replanted under loyal stewards. She paid respects at the Trident, where centuries before, her ancestors had clashed with rebels. Always, Drogon soared overhead, a silent emblem of her reign, his black scales glinting under the sun. Word of Daenerys's fairness and her unstoppable dragon gradually spread beyond Westeros. Traders from Essos spoke of the queen who had undone the dead, the woman who balanced mercy with the unimaginable power of living flame. Some rumored that she was immortal, a goddess in human form, rumors Daenerys dismissed with wry amusement. Others speculated that she might lead a new Valyrian renaissance, bringing dragons back into the world. Daenerys herself remained uncertain if that was possible. She dreamed sometimes of discovering hidden eggs or lost enclaves of dragonkind, but no concrete evidence emerged. One autumn day, she received a letter from Yara Greyjoy. The Iron Islands, newly aligned with the Crown, had made strides in curbing piracy. But Yara spoke of strange sightings at sea, foreign vessels with unknown insignia lurking at the edges of known waters. They did not appear to be simple merchants. Daenerys wondered if it might be a new threat, but nothing suggested immediate hostility. She resolved to keep an eye on the seas, instructing her allies in the Iron Islands to remain vigilant. The realm had learned the hard way that vigilance must never lapse. Seasons slipped by, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. Yet the realm did not descend into another cataclysm. The memory of the Night King's near victory lived on, reminding the living that unity was their greatest shield. Under Daenerys's guidance and with Jon's unyielding support, Westeros found a stability it had not known for generations. Markets thrived, roads improved, and the scars of winter gradually healed. The threat of White Walkers became a fireside tale parents told their children, cautionary but distant. And Drogon? He remained Daenerys's constant companion, a living tapestry of black scales shot through with faint veins of crimson. The aura of heat that clung to him never waned. Snow melted wherever he set foot, and not once did he show the slightest vulnerability to cold. On rare occasions, Daenerys found him gazing at the northern horizon as if remembering the night he battled his undead brother. She would stand beside him, resting a palm against his warm side, and feel the quiet hum of Loloreth's blessing. It was a reminder that so much had been sacrificed to earn this peace, and that in the face of a truly existential threat they had triumphed. At times, Daenerys replayed the final clash with Viserion in her mind, the swirling snow, the blasts of frost that turned to steam against Drogon's scales, the moment Drogon's fire shattered the undead dragon's skull and released his spirit. She recalled the Night King's fury, the spears of ice that never found their mark. Those images were engraved in her memory like bright, haunting etchings. Whenever doubt assailed her, whenever she questioned her right to rule, she remembered that night. They had won not by mere chance, but by the unyielding choice to fight for life. Drogon had been the tip of that spear, unstoppable and alight with divine fire. He carried that fire still, and so did she in her own way. Years passed more swiftly than Daenerys cared to admit. The realm prospered, bit by bit. Children born after the long night grew up in a world free of White Walkers, ignorant of the terror their parents had faced. The men who had once marched north now grew older, their war stories drifting into legend. Tales of the unstoppable black dragon that had slain an undead counterpart became the stuff of songs, often embellished with flamboyant details. Some minstrels claimed Drogon breathed not just flame but living sunlight, that his roar broke glaciers. Daenerys sometimes laughed at these exaggerations, though a part of her was grateful that the realm remembered the threat they had overcome. In the twilight of her reign, Daenerys ventured one last time to the shattered remnants of the wall. She had not been there in person since the day the Night King fell, though she had heard reports of men rebuilding its lower sections. Jon accompanied her, along with a modest escort. It was deep winter again, though far milder than the near-eternal night they had once endured. Drogon's wingbeats carried them across white plains, swirling snow devils in their wake. When they arrived at the wall, they found it smaller than memory suggested. Huge portions had collapsed, never fully repaired. Yet a contingent of the Night's Watch still manned the surviving sections, more symbolic than truly necessary. Daenerys landed Drogon in the courtyard of Castle Black, startling the few black-clad watchmen who rushed out in wide-eyed awe. Jon dismounted a horse moments later, exchanging greetings with the acting Lord Commander, who bowed deeply to both of them. The wind was cold, but Daenerys barely felt it. Drogon exhaled a puff of steam in the frigid air, seemingly unbothered. She gazed at the half-intact ramparts, at the watchmen's meager huts. How different it all seemed from that final stand when the undead had come in relentless waves. She walked the perimeter with Jon, the snow crunching underfoot. They spoke with the watchmen, who reported little in the way of threats, occasional raids by wildling outlaws, but nothing more. The free folk who remained in the far north lived peacefully or migrated south in small groups. It seemed the realm's vigilance had endured, even though the terror of the White Walkers had faded into near myth. When dusk fell, Daenerys climbed to the highest accessible parapet, looking out over the endless expanse beyond the wall. The sky stretched endlessly, pale as bone, dotted with faint stars. A hush enveloped the scene, as though the land itself remembered the clash that once raged here. Jon stood behind her, cloak whipping in the wind, half lost in thought. She closed her eyes, imagining the thunder of undead footsteps, the shriek of Viserion's frosty breath, the searing roar of Drogon's flame. Now only silence. She turned to Jon, voice hushed. "We did it. It's over." He nodded slowly. "And the realm we've built stands. It may not be perfect, but it's alive." She stepped closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I still think I hear Viserion's call in the wind." Jon wrapped an arm around her. "He's at peace." They lingered there until the stars brightened. Eventually, they returned to Drogon, who crouched patiently, tail sweeping arcs in the snow. Daenerys stroked his neck, feeling the living warmth beneath her palm. "Ready?" she whispered. He rumbled as if in answer. Jon climbed up behind her and she guided Drogon into flight. The watchmen below gazed up in awe as the black dragon took to the sky, a dark shape against the aurora that shimmered at the edge of vision. Higher and higher they climbed, the air thinning, the cold biting. Yet Daenerys felt the furnace-like heat of Drogon's body through the saddle. Below stretched the wall, the dotted lights of Castle Black, and the vast whiteness beyond. Daenerys inhaled, heart filled with gratitude and sorrow, memory and hope. She recalled the battle in vivid flashes, Viserion descending in undead fury, Drogon impervious to ice, their final struggle above the swirling snow. She recalled the heartbreak of letting Viserion's remains fall, consumed by holy fire. She recalled the hush when the Night King shattered and the dawn that rose like a benediction. Jon's arms tightened around her waist and she felt the steady beat of Drogon's wings through her entire body. Here, above it all, time felt fluid, as if she existed in every moment at once, past, present, and future. In the present, she was Daenerys Stormborn, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, forging a realm that might never fully understand the sacrifices made to save it. But in that moment, she felt the flicker of Viserion's spirit, the echo of Rhaegal's green eyes, the resonance of all her lost loved ones. And she felt Drogon, unstoppable, a flame that no winter could extinguish. They drifted southward, back toward the heart of the kingdom they had nurtured, back toward the future they continued to shape. The northern lights shimmered behind them, a final salute to the place where a mother and her dragon had defied death itself. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting the wind whip her hair. She could almost hear Viserion's voice in the rush of air, joined by Rhaegal's distant rumble. She felt their presence guiding her forward. Yes, there would always be shadows, always new challenges, but she carried a fire that could never be doused. A fire entrusted to her by the Lord of Light, by fate, by her own unwavering heart, whatever name one wished to give it. Drogon glided on a thermal, wings outstretched, a black silhouette against the moonlit sky. Jon's warmth at her back, the memory of their battles in her mind, the promise of tomorrow in her blood. They were returning not in triumph, but in continuation, for life was not a single victory but an unending tapestry of choices and consequences. And as long as Drogon soared, his fire alight with divine grace, Daenerys knew the realm would endure. She had slain the undead Viserion at the wall. She had shattered the Night King's hold. She had proven that even the bleakest winter could be banished by the fierce, living flame of hope. And that hope, bound in black scales and the glow of a dragon's eyes, carried her ever onward, ensuring that the warmth of life would forever outlast the coldest night.